stations. We're going live on a Friday because, oh wow, some news has come out. Seems like every day news is coming out. So this has been a very exciting 4th of July weekend for the United States players. Okay, talking in stations. EVE Online has been going through some interesting developments that are happening. The company CCP, the maker, has released these drifters upon Nullsec. And they've done it now for 2 weeks, and they've changed how they appear. First, they attacked stations in a few areas, and now there's a full wave of them. Yesterday, we saw that drifters were attacking Sansha in HiSec, one system in particular, the home of ARC, the consortium of some sort. I forget what the AR are for. But they look at lore and they monitor it and put out a lot of really good and polished videos about how to interpret things that are happening. And their system was attacked yesterday by Sansha, and then drifters jumped on the Sansha, and then the military police came in, the Kaldari military police came in, and then Concord came in, and drifters went after everybody, including Concord. And that was kind of interesting. Concord being immune to damage, it looks like, and also being immune to, also not aggravated by being attacked by drifters, just totally ignored them. It's kind of interesting. All right, in here with me, I have our dear friends from Talking in Stations, Carneros.
Good morning, everyone.
Amar.
Good afternoon.
And Ron.
Happy Drifter Day.
Yeah. Looks like it's going to be a drifter week or more. Okay, I'm going to unmute. I'm going to bring in, well, let's see. Teddy, are you here? Are you willing to talk? If not, type me and say no.
Yeah, I'm here.
Hey, man, you're somebody who ran for CSM on a wormhole platform, so you're somebody who is knowledgeable about wormhole space. Can I get your initial thoughts on... Well, we actually haven't discussed what we think is going to happen. So before we talk about your reaction, let's actually say what's going to happen. Who knows? Who can define that? Carneros or Amar?
I can try.
Yeah,
go for it.
So basically, we've seen the drifters attacking Nullsec for, I think it's 1.5 weeks now. And it's been going on and off. We had attacks yesterday, I believe, and now it's been quiet for a couple of hours. The drifters are basically attacking all kinds of systems all around Nullsec. And the reactions from Nullsec has been quite harsh, saying that this is bad gameplay. Mittens has been, the Mitani that is from Goonswarm, has been very vocal, saying this is a bad iteration. So no one is really sure of what this will lead into or what's going to come from it. But it's kind of polarized. It has polarized the community, divided it. Some people think it's a great new element that kind of shakes up the meta. Most Nullsec players that I know of are actually opposed to it. I know that Ron is highly in favor though. But today we had a new scope video coming out. Maybe someone can link that in Twitch chat as well. So what this scope video is basically saying is that due to the drift attacks, the systems that kind of, this is the lore perspective, I guess, the systems in place in game to make local work in the systems is under duress. So they are being strained, and Concord is basically saying that if this keeps up, they will have to turn off local chat basically in Nullsec. And they don't say exactly when. I think the indication is that it might happen within a week or something. So I think that's the short version of what's going on.
it's called the Nullsec Blackout, right? I think that's what they were calling it. All right, let's get some graphics up on screen. All right, so this is something that we've heard a lot of people talk about, saying like, oh, they should remove local. I mean, you hear that quite a bit from people who want EVE to be harder. And now it looks like those people may be getting what they wanted, but we don't know for how long, or if it'll be a delayed local, or or if it will be something that's permanent and dark all the time, which I think is it's interesting because, Carneros, maybe I direct this to you as conversation. It seems like CCP doesn't want to get rid of local because it's a way of people making friends and community building and people not feeling alone in the game. So it's essential for the relationship building aspect. But by the time that you're ready to go into outlaw space where there are no rules, is it as important out there? Aren't relationships already made since it takes a group to survive essentially out there?
I think people are making new relationships all the time in Eve. They're meeting new people. They're meeting new people in their corporation, in their alliance, in their coalition, but they're also meeting new enemies and they're meeting new neighbors. And I think the statistics probably show that I don't know, 50% of the nullsec player base changes corporation once every, I don't know, year, 18 months or something. They have to meet these people somehow. Sometimes they keep going with the same people. And then even if we're not talking about making friends, let's look at making enemies for a moment. Don't you want to know who's threatening you? Do you want to know who's hitting your structures, who's hitting your stuff, there's some things that do report one person, but obviously that can be fudged. Just have just have part of the work done first by one person, and then everyone else can pile in and hide their names. I mean, I think there are some reasons to want to continue making friends and needing local for that. There is also just the feeling of, is this space all empty? Am I the only one playing it as you're moving through? And the last time we had an experiment like this, when they were replacing the chat functionality with new tech and local broke, I think we saw statistics say that activity dropped a lot. In a game that's partially free to play, activity is key to monetization. We don't want CCP to take a massive financial hit as part of experimenting to keep the game fresh.
Right. I think if anything, people are all for changes to bring more people into the game. I think that's the one thing everyone agrees on. Because the more full the virtual world feels, the more investment you feel like making into it. Because the possibilities grow more and more as more people come in. And so when they actually broke accidentally, when they were transitioning from one technology to another, local chat was kind of broken in all sectors of space, right? That was one of the big things. It wasn't just nullsec, it was highsec too. And highsec, as we've seen, has a greater population than nullsec.
I think it's even scarier when local goes out in highsec, because you really feel like, what happened? Did everyone die? Was there a rapture and I missed it?
Right, all these clothes on the ground.
What? Why are there no people in New Eden? Yeah, that would be scary.
Right. Let's go look at that scope video. I think we've pasted it in. Yeah, here it is again inside of chat. We'll put it up on screen. If I can play it without blasting you guys, I will.
After a noticeable reduction of drifter attacks on nullsec structures earlier this week, it appears that another wave of attacks is forming. Adding to the confusion, Concord's SCC division has announced that New Eden's Fluid Router FTL communications network is under enormous pressure due to the combined impact of the Triglavian and Drifter invasions. Resupply of the vital quantum entangled 4-helium superfluid used in the network is increasingly under threat. To ensure sustainable operation of the FTL comms network and guard against the risk of strategic communications being compromised, the SCC will be enforcing reduced bandwidth across its nullsec routers. With drifter strikes continuing for over a week, this assault represents the first major offensive by the drifters since their attack on the Amar Empire 4 years ago. Hitting dozens of systems during the first wave of attacks, the drifters roamed between jump gates, asteroid belts, and structures, attacking anyone and anything they encountered. Their fleets were often striking multiple targets simultaneously in each system. After a brief pause in the assault, the drifters seem now to be initiating another wave of attacks. Not only are they attacking structures, but they also seem to show more focus towards hunting down and destroying individual pilots. It should be noted that drifters, if given the opportunity, will always mercilessly pod capsuleers. Taking both Concorde and Capsuleers completely by surprise, the attacks have created considerable concern and confusion among the nullsec power blocks. Once the predicted local communications blackout is imposed, Capsuleer warlords will have to deal with the developing situation without intelligence gathered from automated registration on local solar system channels. The SCC has additionally stated that if the scale of the attacks continues, then their fluid routers are not expected to support full services in nullsec beyond another week or so. In light of this, it seems clear that the nullsec blackout will take place very soon. This is Lena Amber, reporting for The Scope.
And we're back. All right. So that was the video. Thank you guys for just knowing to be quiet when that was going on. I was afraid you guys were going to talk. So the nullsec blackout. How about it? Ron, what are your thoughts?
I absolutely love it. As expected. You know, I think I think that it's, you know, we always kind of brag or whatever, you know, we're all very proud that this game is so complex and it's so different and so interesting. But, you know, we fall into this rhythm of everything is very predictable and, you know, it's almost, you know, monotonous in a way that, you know, Hilmar was talking it down under and he was saying, you know, they need to be bold and they need to, you know, uh, do these kind of exciting things and make things dangerous. And I remember, you know, and I think, you know, you played it on the last chill stream. And when he said that, everyone like kind of cheers, right? Yeah, that's awesome. But then when they do something bold, whoa, 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 not like this. So I think the local blackout is interesting because they leave it open, right? And they talk about bandwidth and they talk about, oh, you know, maybe so what that says to me is maybe it'll be delayed, right? Or maybe it will require some sort of structure or something moving forward, and it may require fuel or ozone or something. And I think that's all great. You know, I love you know, active gameplay should reward players, right?
Yeah. I think that's one of the tenets. I mean, everybody says like Eve is this, Eve is that, Eve is all about this, Eve is all about that, and it's just like, well, I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't necessarily agree with that. But one of the things that people probably all agree on is if you do stuff, there should be like, well, if you're doing to get rewards, you should be doing stuff, right?
Yeah, completely. Like, you know, like my
Not necessarily the other way
feelings
around,
about
though.
cloaking. Yeah,
Not
for
not
sure.
necessarily the
Like
other way around, but yeah.
like cloaky camping, right? As a whole is not bad, but AFK cloaky camping is oppressive to the game, right? You know, if you have 600 accounts, but you don't have to be there for 23 hours, and it affects other people that are actively playing, then that sucks. But if you're sitting there with your 2 or 3 accounts and you're actively cloaky camping a system, that's great. You know, that's good gameplay.
Yeah. All right. Oh, Dirk McGurk's in here. Are you?
I'm just freaking waking up.
Are you okay?
I'm just waking up to like the first thing I see today is on Twitter, Jin flipping a lid or whatever. And I'm like, okay, now I got to go to Talking Stations and see what the hell's going on.
Oh, I like the sound of that. You know what's interesting? I don't know if you guys have noticed, but I'm like, wow, if it's this busy in here, what's going on Reddit? And I look over there and it's like calm and tranquil and almost like, what's going on? This is very strange.
Well, I jumped in and it was like, I don't know, 500 lines or something like that. And I'm just like, okay, whatever. Like I saw I'd gotten tagged in a couple things, and it was so deep I couldn't even find where I'd gotten tagged without doing a search of it. And I'm just like, okay, I just woke up. Could somebody give me the TLDR? And they're like, delete local. And I'm like, oh dear sweet Jesus, it's Friday.
All right, so I wanted to ask Teddy, like he's a wormholer, and these guys deal with no local all the time, and just kind of try to get their perspective, see like what they think of that sort of thing. Do we have other wormholers in here? You can just X up in public if you are.
I've actually been a wormhole, but I'm not anymore.
All right, let me talk to Teddy then, because he is an active wormholer.
Yeah, shoot.
Hello.
Hey. So Nullsec Blackout, now that we've described it, what are your thoughts?
I think it's an interesting change. I think it's definitely going to like shift something up, like any sort of like just mixing and like messing up of the like it's just stagnant. So any sort of just chaos is good, in my opinion.
Does okay, let's say that, because there's wormholers that live in, there's different types of wormhole behavior, right? Play or gameplay. There are guys that just go into wormholes.
Yeah, you've got Ashy and Tolkien in here that regularly roam Nullsec.
Oh, okay. Let's. Did you say Ashley?
Yeah, Ashley and Tolkien. They both two different wormhole corps.
Awesome. Okay, both you guys, Ashley, Tolkien. What are you guys' thoughts on this sort of thing? You guys roam Nullsec. Is this going to interfere with your hunting?
Oh, it's amazing. Absolutely love it. It just means that these VNIs that previously could just see someone hit local and either their bot or their hand would click on the warp button, they're out within 20 seconds. If anything, it means more dead VNIs, but it could lead to more fights. It could lead to bigger things like Thani's getting tackled, which is all good. More things dead, it's good.
Yeah, we also can wait until the local is going to die. It's gonna bring more content, not only to the guys that are hunting, but also to the guys that are ratting. They will have to do it actively. Their bots will probably die the first.
Doesn't all that naturally assume that the same level of activity that is going on now is going to continue, but in a blacked out state? I mean, you're assuming that those people are going to continue to do what they've been doing in an environment where they had better intel, right? And that now that intel won't be there, that they'll just be more susceptible to being caught, as opposed to just not be there.
Well, that's part of the worry, because since they do have all these protections like local chat and near 2 in place already, if this is just a week-long event, what's to say that half of Nullsec is just not going to log in for a week and wait for it to all blow over?
Okay, so what Tolkien said, because it was kind of hard to hear him on his microphone, was it's going to be fun. They're going to be able to kill more things. There'll be more things for them to do. These are the wormholers who hunt in high sec, because again, there'll be a blackout. But the people who are out there,
wormholers that hunt in Nullsec.
Sorry, in Nullsec, yeah. Sorry, yeah, thank you. But the people who are out there grazing on rats or mining or whatever will have to be at the keys to figure out how to escape better. And they will figure that out too, or they'll adapt as well. So it'll be interesting to see that stuff. And that's what Tolkien had said earlier, if I'm not mistaken. Ashley, you were saying? Did I cut you off?
Oh, I was just saying that, if this is just a temporary thing, which it could well, then half of Nullsec might not just log in because they could, pack up and wait till next week when their local's back or something.
Yeah, so they could wait it out, right? If this is going to be a 2-week thing as the drifters, storyline wise, as the drifters interfere with communications, Concord says, we'll drop them as long as these drifter raids are happening, and it could only last a few weeks and then or less. And then everybody that was basically indoors because it was raining outside and too dangerous can just come out when the sun comes back out. Is that a fear?
What about the
Yeah.
guys that are playing actively? Will they just, I don't know, don't think so.
Well, I think one of the things that's interesting, Carneros, you might be able to talk about this, is part of the thing that keeps players going is habit, the habit of playing. It's like I wake up, I think about Eve. If I have free time, I turn it on, I get in there and play. Or I come home from work, and the first thing I do is play Eve Online. Those kinds of habits, sometimes you don't even know why you're doing it, you're just doing it. And I wonder if you break that momentum, like, are you at risk of having people say, yeah, I don't need to turn on Eve Online? Like if people decide to wait out something.
Well, there's habits, but there's another thing to talk about too, which is you've got a game that's sort of half subscription and half free to play. And the free to play, one of the rules of free to play games is you have to have activity in order to have monetization. If you want people to spend on even on cosmetic items, they need to be logging in and playing the game. And particularly ship skins. I mean, you can get some enjoyment from it just from looking at them in station, but there's a whole other side of enjoyment you get when you undock, get in a group, and do stuff with it. And you want the activity in order to get the monetization. If they do something that causes people to log off for a week, their income is going to drop that week. Not their subscription income, but their non-subscription income. If they do something that makes you drop for 2 weeks, I mean, people are still going to have the repetitive, habitual behavior of logging into their comms and reading their Discord or their Reddit or their forums or whatever, however their group chooses to communicate. But they're not going to fly their ships as much, and they're not going to have as much activity, and then monetization falls. We don't want CCP to take a big financial hit, because big financial hits to CCP have the potential of translating into more influence from Pearl Abyss and less influence from CCP, and we don't want that to happen. We want CCP to run Eve.
Oh, that's a really good point. Like if CCP is making mistakes and not making any money, then Pearl Abyss could look at that and say, like, well, we're gonna have to do things that we know work, right?
Or they'll offer to help or anything. I mean, there's a lot of ways that could, but it's none of them are that good.
Yeah. So do you see this as a big risk, or where are you at on this?
I think it's fantastic that the company is willing to try things, to shake stuff up from time to time. I think that we're at a place in the world of game development where it's just absolutely obvious that you want to try things and look at all the statistics about them behind the scenes and see what behavioral changes happen and what adoption happens, and that the statistics are often more valuable than the words that come out in a forum like Reddit or the official forums. I mean, you want to look at their behavior, not what they're saying to you,
Right.
and what they're saying to you, actually both, but you want to look at their behavior. But when you're trying too many massive changes at the same time, your data becomes dirty.
Yep.
It contaminates each other, and you can't tell if a change you're seeing is caused by the drifters or it's caused by the changed to local, or if it's caused by a combination of the two, maybe the public would have embraced no local easier if they hadn't just been shaken up first with this scary drifter attack, for example. I'm reminded of 2005 when Sony Online Entertainment was running a game called Star Wars Galaxies, and it wasn't really growing, and they weren't happy with where the numbers were, and they came up with this idea of let's shake things up and do it differently. People say they want to become a Jedi. Why don't we make that more accessible? It was hilariously difficult to get to be a Jedi at that time.
Right.
So they came up with what they called the New Game Experience, or the NGE, and it was a big radical rethinking of a number of things in the game. And they rolled it out, and people freaked out. And not only did they not acquire a whole new additional audience, but they lost a huge chunk of their original audience. And the entire MMO development world learned a lesson that day, which was they learned a couple lessons. One was, when you start a new game like this, you get a community, and the community you get on day one is the community you have. It's the EverQuest community right now, 18 years along, is the same EverQuest community they had. They're older, they have arthritis now, some of them have passed, but it's the same damn community. No, it is actually. But you have to, I mean, CCP has this community from Eve. They come back to it regularly and recruit previous players to come back again. It's actually surprisingly hard to leave Eve permanently. You'll get pulled back in at some point in the future, and you'll still read articles when you see them cross your desk years later. Oh, wow, something's happening in Eve, and then you go read it. There's an attraction there. CCP relies on that a lot to fill their customers in. It's probably 10 times cheaper to reacquire a former customer than to acquire an entirely new customer. It's hard to acquire new customers for an older game like this, especially one that's not easy to get into immediately.
Could it take something like this, something that lights up the imagination of people who have played it, who have heard about it, who maybe just want to read about it, is these kinds of imaginative changes, these seismic shifts, to reach people who are like, yeah, I've heard about the game, but I don't think I'm going to play it. And then they say, oh, this is interesting. These aliens are attacking these fortresses that players built.
I reach them with information, yes. Refresh the brand in their mind, yes. Reach them in a way that makes them want to download the client, create an account, log in, figure out how to fly a ship in order to undock and see that there's no local, and how they're going to know the drifters. No, that doesn't all come together right.
Mm-hmm.
And you definitely need the part two of getting them in. Once you get them in a ship, the part two is get them into a player corporation. I don't know. I hope they at least keep local in the starter systems in some way. I don't know what they can do for that, though.
I think they will. I think local is
it's in HiSec.
Yeah, it's only in. Yeah,
they're not doing anything to HiSec because they like HiSec.
Well, it's also
Wouldn't it be fun if HiSec had a sudden drifter side effect that you could only stay docked for 5 minutes, and after that it undocked you automatically?
Back to kick stations.
Sorry, that was mean.
Was that your brainstorming when you were working for CCP?
Just erase that part. No, I never said that in those days.
I want to know about your ideas that you had.
My job back then was to get new players into the game and get old players back into the game. and get them to buy Plex sometimes and things like that. I had to get them to open a second account, get them to refer a friend. I was hired at CCP as a senior director of global sales. So my job was, get people in here. When I see things like not so much the local, but the rumors about asset safety, I think, oh, geez, because my first reaction is not actually the player reaction, it's the dev reaction.
What do you mean by that?
I think about trying to get people to come back to the game and play. One of the big levers that CCP has is you've got a bunch of stuff here in the game. You already have a head start. Look at all this value you have. You have billions of ISK worth of stuff. You even have Plex that you could just tap at any time. You should come back and play with all this great stuff.
Yeah, and you might have stuff that's worth so much more than it was when you were playing.
And there's an attraction to your stuff in the game. If they take away all that stuff, you have far, far less reason to come back and play this game again.
Yeah, such a good point. As always, Carneros. So yeah, and that I imagine that's the stuff that we're thinking about last, right? Like the people who are up in arms are thinking about themselves and their current situation because they're EVE players and they're here. But all the unseen stuff needs to be thought about as well. Now, the whole thing about asset safety is just something that, and we can talk about that a little bit later, but that's just something that's been hinted at. But what we do know is that there seems to be some kind of, temporary or not, disturbance in local chat for Nullsec. They call it the Blackout. And it could be temporary. It could be a delayed local as opposed to a local that's gone. Some of the reasons that you brought up about talking with people that you don't know in space is important as you get to know who's attacking you or get to know possible places that you can go next. I've done that. I've talked with strangers in Nullsec and said, hey, where are you from? What's your alliance? What's it like over there? So that kind of stuff definitely happens.
I mean, I have a question to you guys when it comes to no local. So from the way I see it, you have the advantage maybe of enabling PvP content for all of the small gang roaming stuff and wormholers going through nullsec statics to get some content and get some more PvP, because it's going to be more difficult to defend yourself if you don't have local as an intelligence tool. On the other side, you have the possibility of people simply not playing the game, like the ratters, the miners, those guys just being docked up and trying to wait out a storm kind of thing. So if you look back at last year when we had the chat difficulties, like when the chat wasn't working, sure, you had a lot of bots dying, but another side effect, as I understand it, was that people simply didn't undock in order to wait for it to be fixed. So the question is, since we don't know how long this no local in Nullsec is going to last, would it be better if CCP actually said that there's not going to be any local going forward, or actually giving a time span to it? Or what do you guys see the implications being of the way they're introducing it now?
The way they've set it up in the law, I see them using this as a test. And if there's a massive outcry, and if they see numbers going down, I can imagine them saying doing law reasons that the drifters have been pushed off, and that they can resume local.
Yeah, I mean, I see this as being a test too, and I think that you'll basically see in the short term people react to it thinking that it is going to be a temporary sort of thing, right? So they'll adapt to that however they would. If it's short term, I would expect them to be doing less activity out there that would allow hunters to come and get them. if it becomes a long-term thing after that, then they're going to have to adapt to a new reality. And, up on the screen right now, I think it is anyways, or at least I'm on pause, whatever. It says, will the blackout bring more chaos? Potentially. But there's a lot of people out there that think that I don't know, either the nullsec empires that exist right now can't adapt, or will somehow become more fragmented because of this. And I think that's absolutely wrong. I think that if you have a shift to more chaos, more danger, more unknowns, that's likely to push more consolidation as inherently risk averse human beings seek the safety of large numbers. So any of this talk about, this is going to fragment, it's going to open up space. I think it's going to actually create a little more dead space out there, like for those hunters that are floating around out there and whatnot. I think you're going to find, just literally more empty space. This is not the year of, 40, 50,000 people being online at any given time, right? There's only so many players with, with all their alts and things out there. I think you're going to see a lot of alts just sort of like sideline for a little while.
Will HiSec grow in population?
This I don't think has anything to do with HiSec, right? HiSec has its own issues.
If you're too afraid to play in nullsec, you'll be like, well, I want to play, but I can't play in nullsec. It's too scary, so I'll just play on HiSec where things are safer.
And I don't want to use terms like too scary, okay? Because look, one of the things that has bothered me lately,
maybe inflammatory.
Well, it's this kind of talk of nullsec crying or nullsec whining, okay? And I'm not going to lie, okay? When this all first began with the drifters and whatnot, I thought it was a little too hardcore right out of the gates and whatnot. As time has gone on more, and we've sort of seen how some of these things, it's not crying, even though I get how we all seem to attack the other groups in space whenever they raise an issue or what have you. So I don't want to say it's too scary. If there's more danger, if there's more unknown, I think you're just going to see a natural human tendency by most players, not all. Some of them out there are really good at bucking kind of that and adapting to it in a way to say, oh, you know what? Look, I've always wanted to go out there and hunt these people. I've always wanted to go out and kill these people. The question will be, will they even be there for you to hunt? Or will they be huddled up in such a thing, as they adapt to it in the short or long term, that when you do run across them, now it is a massive group of them that you couldn't have done anything to anyways. So it's going to be interesting one way or the other. I think CCP is running a test right now. Okay. And their test may be, their test at this point may actually be, if we're going to catch a bunch of crap, then we're going to throw it all at the wall at once. let's take the full load right in the side of the head, and kind of dish this stuff out there. So we'll see how it works out.
But then you don't know what worked and what didn't work.
A little louder, Carneros.
But then you don't know what worked and what didn't work because all the data is messed up.
I think that's been a history of theirs for a long time, though, Carneros. They put in a bunch of things that it's really hard to kind of measure. Well, what was the part of that worked?
And I agree with you, Dirk. If people, hunters or small gangs think that that null will be the same, but just minus local, they're completely wrong, right? Because we will adapt in the sense that maybe we anchor 500 bubbles on every regional gate and we put, people on those regional gates, the people that come into our area. It won't be as free roam, right? We will adapt to, whatever it is. So I think it'll be more difficult, or just random explorers, that kind of thing. We'll set up new channels, or instead of local, we'll have, people that are cloaky on top of gates, and every time someone decloaks on a gate, that's reported into local, that sort of thing. So, or that's reported into a new intel channel. You know, we will respond, and I think we will just get more consolidated, and maybe ratting will be a little bit more condensed, and it'll be a problem for us, but we will protect, our area tenfold, right?
Well, and and again, when we talk about sort of the differences of activity, right? I think that we will see kind of a downgrade in the number of alts that are out there just ratting or mining or things like that, or they will consolidate into groups for protection to be able to do that, right? When it comes to actual defense of space, I don't think that the absence of nullsec will really change a lot. I think that people will be actually in the short term especially, but also in the long term, more likely to say, you know what, I don't care. We're going to be out there. We're going to be out there in our fleets of 250. Whether locals there or not, I just have trust in my FC, and we're going to, make sure that nobody comes and takes our stuff.
But okay, so let's say they do actually do it as a test. I think this is going to be quite interesting because it's going to be dirty data maybe going forward. Because basically, if people perceive it as being a test, that could potentially mean that people will actually log off in order to just ride out the storm,
Yes.
kind of thing. So you don't get the actual behavior that you could potentially get if you don't have local, like how people would actually try to adapt to it. So they kind of shoot themselves in the foot doing that. Am I making sense now?
Yes.
There's a lot of
Answer
silence.
is yes.
Sorry, I was typing and eating at the same time. So
Need more fingers.
Losing local, it means that both sides need to adapt to it. You can't use local to hunt, and you can't use local to defend yourself either. So the hunters need to adapt to the new environment, and defenders need to adapt to the new environment.
But I do agree with what you were saying, is that if the perception is this is a short-term storyline related thing, whether CCP is using it as a test of how players react to no local or the drifter menace or any of that stuff, right? If they perceive it to be short-term, then they will likely do the short-term thing of I'll ride it out in whatever way I deem to be the right way of riding that out, whether it be logging off, whether it be limiting the number of accounts you use at any one given time, all that kind of stuff, right? If they think it is the new norm, then that takes a different level of decision making and adaptation. Short term, I just see activity going down a bit, but whatever. I mean, I could be completely wrong, and everybody's gonna start logging in all the things.
You don't think it'll shift? Like there will be like people won't just log off. They'll do something else. They'll find a different way to enjoy the game.
I think it depends. Like if you've got the increased risk of having no local, I think you probably stand and say that bounties and stuff should probably go up to compensate, because it does become a lot more dangerous. And I think with a higher bounty per site, I think it would probably encourage people to actually continue to rat.
Yeah.
And this morning, I was getting a lot of flack because, I was really, really excited after downtime for more drifters, right? And, you know, and the reason for that, though, is because the past week we've started to implement, several sort of plans, right? Standing fleets and new intel and, new groups and new ACL lists, and all of this stuff is now finally all implemented, and I'm eager to use it, right? We have a great map, and I sort of shuffle people around so they're spread out, so wherever the drifters hit, because we had over 190 systems hit, right, in the past couple of days. So saving on jump timers and all of these things. But the only reason that we took it that far was because we were thinking that it's going to continue. So we're going to adapt, and put all these measures in place. But then, no drifters. And I'm like, oh man, come on. We just got all these things in order. Let's do it. And people are like, Ron, shut up. We're going to sacrifice you to the drifters.
Because you're from Test Alliance, one of the big organizations under pressure right now, just in case people don't know. Yeah, and somebody said, like, well, Ron's a Care Bear or something like that. And I just want to say, no, he's not a Care Bear. He's a guy that throws himself into things, right? It's like, you know what? If you guys want to talk about this, let's just do it. You know, get in a ship and let's go do it. He's not about sitting around and being too cerebral about it. He's somebody who appreciates
not too cerebral about it.
Well, no, he's as intelligent as anyone. It's just not in. He's not like me, totally inward, doom and gloom, that sort of thing.
I think Ron is kind of developing into the Keanu Reeves version of an Eve player or something, which is a huge compliment.
Oh, we have Ashtaroth here. Don't scream out yet. Let me moderate your voice. Let me see how loud you are before you start. Ash, you there? Ashtarothi, wake up, wake up. All right. Well, when he comes on.
He'll speak when he's ready.
Yeah. Okay, so the Nullsec Blackout. It's interesting because you guys have brought up a lot of things I hadn't thought about. Dirk, of course, Carnero's stuff, and Dirk.
This is not some new idea. It's not like getting rid of local in Nullsec hasn't been bandied about before. And generally the same arguments come up. Look, I think under a scenario where we have local as we do, okay, and I am somebody who is against some of these, from what I've heard, kind of automated methods for using local intel and things like that, right? I'm talking old school, just like, eyes at the keyboard, watching somebody coming through and reporting them in an intel channel, right? Under that old school sort of scenario, the activity out in space was higher, right? Now, granted, that made it harder for hunters because players were literally, typing so-and-so, this system, which alerted you to the fact that kind of stuff was around. But that also drew a number of people out there that had those kind of consistent sort of, people at the keyboard looking at things and watching and reporting. It made them feel comfortable to be out in space. You reach a point where if they are uncomfortable, okay, with that, it doesn't mean that they're not out there at all. I just don't think they're going to be out there with the numbers that they are. And maybe that is a good thing too. Maybe we get rid of, the 27 VNI accounts, or, I know VNIs are getting nerfed and all that, but like, whatever the hell it is, right? Maybe that gets, I just don't know that that's good for CCP. Mm-hmm. That might be the right thing to do in what has become Game of Alts, okay, and Game of Mass is generation and Game of Mass or generation. But I don't necessarily think that this idea that oh wow, hunters are going to, this is the new era for hunters is going to come around. I think there's going to be less bodies out there, less players.
I would agree with you on that, Dirk, to a certain extent. Although what I would say is, in the immediate, next couple days after it happens, yeah, there are probably going to be fewer people out. But eventually, folks are going to want to get out and keep doing what they're doing, and they're going to take the risk and hope that the umbrella saves them. I mean, I don't know. One of the things that makes me laugh about this whole situation is the list of people and all the people that have been asking for getting rid of local or doing something about local intel or doing something about asset safety and all this other kind of stuff is longer than, anything in the game. And now CCP's doing it and everybody's freaking out. It's really funny. I just think it's amusing.
Serenus from Test Alliance.
Yeah, so I see how CCP might use this as a short-term test, but I'm kind of surprised to see everyone here jumping on board. Because there are things that are good for the game that players might not like. I think jump fatigue was one of those. Like, for instance, if you give everyone a Titan, numbers will go up tomorrow, I promise. That doesn't mean it's good for the long-term health of the game or it's going to retain players, right?
Did you hear people jumping on board, though, besides Ron?
I think everyone's saying this will be a good short-term test. I don't think they're jumping on board the ideas. I think they're saying it'll be a good long-term test, and I think those are those short-term tests. And I think those short-term tests.
It's a terrible test because they're screwing up their data by putting it next to too many other changes, and they're polluting their ability to look at what is happening. So as a test, it's terrible.
Sure, but even as a test, even if it's a pure test and you don't have any of that contamination, you might not be testing the right thing.
Well, I take Carneros' point. You won't know if you're testing the right thing because the results will be inconclusive.
Well, if it doesn't work out, then it doesn't work out. I mean, the benefit of doing it the way that they're doing it with this drifter nonsense is that they can just say, oh, we were just trying it out. It's back. We'll roll it back. And it's not like they made a game change and then went back on it. So I can understand why they did it this way.
They certainly have a lot of room to roll it back, right?
Right.
They can just say, drifter invasion over. Everything goes back to the way it was.
I think when they remove local, numbers are going to go down. And I don't think that means a whole lot. I don't think that means it's bad for the game.
Mm-hmm.
It
I don't
doesn't
know.
mean
Well, you know,
anything.
I'm of both minds of it because you remember when we saw the chat blackout last March, I guess it was now, when everything went to crap when they switched the chat server onto the cloud. You know, I was out hunting with a couple of the init guys. We had a lot of fun. We had a great time. We caught a bunch of bots. We caught some guys that weren't looking for anybody to be in their space, and it was fun. And the news that this had happened had not filtered out yet. So I think in the immediate aftermath, there's probably a couple of days before people realize it. And at that point, you know, who knows what's going to happen. But anything different, I'm of the anything different is good mentality, at least in the short term. And if it doesn't work out, then they have a perfect excuse to roll this back. So I can't say I'm upset about this. I think it's going to be interesting.
Well, that's interesting, former CSM Brisk Rubal. Because the CSM, I guess, was, we heard that CSM were against the drifter things or something. Or was that an exaggeration?
I can understand that. I mean, it's PvE, you know, and when you've got a CSM full of folks that are PvPers, I can understand why they wouldn't want it. And I'm fine with that. You know, I don't like the way the drifters are programmed now because they're not really doing anything of substance. And it's just, you know, busy work cleanup type stuff. It's not fun.
Mm-hmm.
If they made them fun, it would be different. You know, if there was a good loot that dropped her, you know, you got equivalent, you know, ISK for ratting to kill these guys, then yeah, people would be happy with it. Right now, it's just really just more of an annoyance and ping spam.
That really is curious to me, and I haven't really thought about it in a deep way. But the idea that something's not fun unless you're benefiting from it. Have we all gotten to the point where if we're not progressing, something is not fun? Like it's not worth it. It's not fun. Like are we kind of spoiled that way that we should always progress, or can not losing actually be its own reward? That sort of thing.
This is a
You can use
game,
a fight and still have
but
fun.
Let's go with
ahead,
Teddy
Ted.
and then Brisk.
I think you can lose a fight and still have fun. As long as you like learn from it, have a good fight that lasts like a long time.
But that would be different than, it's like a tree falling in the forest and nobody hears it. Did it actually happen? That philosophical thing is like, if people weren't there to witness it, does it have any meaning? So if you're fighting something that's a robot and you die and it was kind of fun and funny,
Hold on.
was that fun or not?
I mean, as long as it means something to yourself,
Yeah,
then I suppose it means that's all that matters, really.
that's true, because we play games all the time where funny things happen and you're like, oh my God, there was only me that witnessed that. That was really cool.
I don't think this is a
Ashtarothi.
Eve. Hey, what? I don't think this is an Eve gaming thing. This is just a general gaming thing. People like rewards, and I've noticed that like it reminds me of other free-to-play games where there's like some sort of grind to level up to get to some better thing, and people will act like the grind isn't playing the game, like they're trying to work towards earning this reward. So this relationship between players, the activity, and the rewards they get is really, really important. And so in order to provide like the proper satisfaction for your work, you need to be voluntarily doing it, and there needs to be some sort of feeling that what you're doing is valuable in some way. So in a world in which these kinds of things are constant and there's no end in sight, then even if it's fun the first time or two that you do it, very quickly you're like, oh man, this is BS.
And I think to Asterothe's point, that's pretty valid. I think part of the issue with Eve is just I can't say that I'm speaking for everybody, but I think the vast majority of nullsec PvPers view PvE as a means to an end. We do it because we have to make it so we can buy PvP ships and go fight each other. So with the drifters, that's PvE content in a PvP general area, and you're basically forcing groups of people who want to fight each other to go fight NPCs, because if we don't, they're going to blow up stuff that we need to go fight each other. So in the end, it's less fun and more housekeeping, and it's kind of one of those things where, all right, you got to eat your meat before you get your pudding, and that sucks. We're adults. Sometimes we want to have ice cream first. We want to go out in PvP and fight with each other and not have to worry about going home and clearing drifter fleets off of our structures before we can go back to the war.
I just
and
want
the
to
fact that
break.
we stopped the war drove me crazy.
I want to break in because
really annoying.
We have breaking news. We are finding out that it is nullsec local in delayed mode, so it's not a complete blackout. It's delayed mode.
Well, that's great. That's what we've been asking for. So nobody should be complaining then. If it's delayed, that's what I campaigned on that. A bunch of people have campaigned on that. Everybody wants delayed.
Still complain because they needed to keep it separate in order to be able to get data from it. They shouldn't be making changes like this without the ability to evaluate the change.
Well, that's not a complaint probably that Brisk is pointing to. That's a good analysis. That's knowing how to work with gamers and in the gaming industry. I think the complaints are probably different, but I totally separate what you say, Carneros, as far as analysis on what a company needs to do a better job. That's separate from some of the complaints that we have been seeing. Or I don't know if they're complaints, but I think they're complaints. How could you characterize them any different way?
No, but wait, did you say delayed mode? Because it's not delayed in the sense
Like
that you
wormhole
have
mode.
someone... Yeah, it's going to be like Wormholes, basically, where unless you write something in chat, you're not going to show up. I think that's what they mean by delay.
Let's take a quick pause. I'm going to and we'll go silent, but I'm going to just read this with the computer because I want to see if this works. I'm testing things too. Here we go.
As reported in the scope earlier today, over the coming days we will be changing the way local chat works. This change will affect the whole of nullsec space. Local chat in all nullsec space will be switched over to delayed mode. This means that it will behave as local chat in wormhole space, with pilots only appearing in the local population listing should they choose to post messages. Obviously, this will cause a substantial change to the dynamics of nullsec, so we want to inform the community before we begin. The duration of this blackout is undetermined, and we will be monitoring what effect this has on the cluster. We will give at least 48 hours of notice before initiating the blackout so pilots can make the necessary preparations.
And there it is. You heard it from the, DED itself. Through the
Does the word delay have no meaning anymore? Like do words just literally not have meaning anymore? That's not delayed.
That's not delayed.
That's opt-in local.
Yeah.
Wormhole local.
But is that what it's known as? Or are we
local?
Yeah. So this is essentially taking away local.
Banana local.
Yeah, it's essentially.
But you only run local if you type.
Yeah.
Well, look, to Carneros' point, I think he's absolutely right. If the whole concept behind this was to do a test to see if these changes would be good, but I don't know that that's what they're doing. I think this seems more like it's summertime. Let's mess up the meta because we can, and there you go. I don't see a lot of rhyme or reason behind much of this, at least as far as I've seen.
This feels very consistent with what CCP has been saying is going to be happening later this year. If we're going to see some sort of like comms tower be given to nullsec in order to establish their own local, you got to get rid of local first, right?
Well, you could do it the other way around. Yeah, you could.
I guess you could have it at the same time, but like this goes back to what I was even saying yesterday. It was like, well, what if the drifters knock out local and then the Triglavians give us some tower that allows us not only see local, but also like see the drifters, and that's our way of counterattacking.
Let's play this out just a few months in advance, right? They take out local. Everybody's in the dark unless they talk in local. That's a big change. Now you put in structures that will allow empires or people who have infrastructure in regions, people who control space, sov space, to put up towers that bring local back to a certain degree in certain areas, the areas that they want. But now you also have this drifter menace that is a constant wear and tear on your infrastructure. Either you defend it or you let it die and put a new one back up. Are we seeing like a heavier tax on living in Nullsec and building out infrastructure?
I don't think it's a tax. I think it's trying to recognize that there needs to be some benefit to owning Sov. And at the same time, while there's also a benefit, there also needs to be responsibilities. So I don't have a problem with it. Frankly, if they're going to do it, go that route where you can put up comms to get immediate local back and things like that. That's great. That's what we've been asking for. I mean, that's what a lot of people have been asking for a while. So I'm glad that they're listening. So I think this is probably going to be it's going to be an interesting change. I think it's a good change. We'll see how, the players feel when they get used to it. But, everybody's been saying local is too good an intel tool and it's too good for bots and it's too easy for a whole bunch of different reasons. So CCP's giving folks what they claim that they want.
I mean, Intel
tools, see what happens.
Intel tools, at least the stuff that NC or some guys in, not NC, but the renter groups, Intel tools were automatic. They knew what was coming at them without having to do any work, without even posting people watching systems. You just knew what was coming at you. And the only thing that could get past that was wormholers in your own system. So they could safe up all the time. For better
Christian's
or worse.
point in the chat, how big will the local delay be? That's already why Dirk's point of why did they say delay? Because it's not a delay. You're going to confuse the shit out of people by calling it a delay when it's not a delay, when it's wormhole, local, and nullsec.
This is not, when people talked about delayed mode, this is not what they talked about.
No, what we talked about with delayed mode was you don't, say for example, you jump into a system, you don't appear in local until your cloak timer's off or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Or where there's a 50 second or a minute delay between when you arrive in a system and when you show up in local. That was delayed local. This is wormhole local. This is exactly what's in the...
My bad. Sorry about that. The other thing it says in this very first line, I think it's very interesting. It says, over the coming days, we'll be changing the way local works. That sounds permanent.
Yeah, I think this is great. My first reaction though is if they want to shake up nullsec, why do they let these cyanojammers exist? Let's cut those suckers in half or something with them. Oh, they can remove local, but leave the cyanojammers. Oh my god.
I must have missed that. I missed that part. They're not touching cyanojammers, are they?
No, that was my point.
Oh.
Yeah, if they want to mess up,
with...
yeah, right. Like Risk, you guys messed with the cyanojammers. Well, they weren't heavily defended though, right?
We literally just got screwed on a great dread bomb we were going to hit on a PL move up because of a fucking cyanojammer, and I hate the whole gameplay around them right now. It's driving me crazy. These guys are good. They're smart enough. It takes 5 minutes to re-online the jammer after it goes off. So you drop the jammer, you wait for you instantly re-up it. You wait till the last 5 or 10 seconds. Then you light your cyno, all your guys jump, and then boom, the cyno jammer's up, and nobody can get a cyno on grid fast enough to catch you. It's bullshit. But it's smart gameplay, and I give NC Dot and PL credit for doing it. But man, every time they do something, they think, oh, well, we'll make it 5 minutes. That won't be that bad. Yeah, it's that bad. So yeah, I'd love to see them change that shit.
Well, from a hunter's perspective, you would want to see that change.
Correct. Right. From a moving perspective, yeah, hey, we were able to do something safely. But we wanted to kill your guys tight, so that was.
Are you guys excited about what's going on? Because I'm starting to feel pretty pumped up about this.
I was not happy with the drifters. I thought the drifters thing was annoying, but the no local, that's kind of getting me, a little happy in the pants right now. That's a good.
Arturi 1991 says yes, a lot.
Well, I am excited. I agree that the drifters were a really bad implementation. Still think it is. But if I was still in Wormhole space doing roams and trying to get some PvP content, I think removing local is absolutely amazing.
Lorelei says deleting local is the best thing they did in years. And yeah, look, it's a small sample group of 5 or 6 guys so far. But why don't you guys tell us?
I think you're going to have a couple of different, views out there, right? Wormholers are going to be sitting there going, "Oh hell yeah, that's the best thing that's ever freaking happened to the game," because now, something that they're already used to is going to be put out into this much larger part of space where they come to hunt once in a while, right? The other small gang hunters, they may also think that that's good too. Now, whether or not they think it's good when they start getting out there and actually going system to system to system hunting, right, and trying to find people, now they're going to have to search every what appears to be empty system, right? In order to do that. Some systems are pretty big. DScan doesn't just always get it for you, but whatever. You're going to have some people like Brisk, who see it from their point of view as to why it's a good thing. The question will be, on the whole, do the people that would normally be in space, just out there doing their day-to-day thing, think that it's a great thing? And that's where the problem will come down to. What will the numbers prove out for CCP? Is the vocal minority that wants to be able to hide and kill more than the potentially larger group of people that are just doing day-to-day chill and rat or whatever, right?
Well, chill and rat and distort the economy because you're making so much money sitting there watching Netflix.
Well, I guess the question then would be, well, were you mad with the environment that CCP created that allowed that level of distortion to occur with the way that they did anomalies, with the way that they did, all of that, faucet type stuff? I mean, local was not the issue years ago. That wasn't the issue.
But
so something's changed in the meantime.
Doug, doesn't it still boil down to that perception? Like, if I'm not sure how to interpret the news that just came out.
Well,
but if people perceive it as being permanent, that means they actually do have to adapt into a new meta.
Yes.
So that means you can't just log off forever, because that means you're going to quit the game. And if that's the result, then that's going to be really bad. But if people realize that, okay, I have to adjust to not having local now, that means I'm still gonna go back into space quite soon, I guess, once I understand how to approach it. So all of a sudden, you do have that content where the roamers won't just go through system upon system, not finding anything. But that really boils down to the perception, though, doesn't it?
Yes.
If we go back to Matterall's point about the tax, I think that's interesting because you do sort of pay a quote tax in man hours, right? And you have so many man hours per week. And if you do have these sort of little things that you have to invest people hours into, they're not going to be able to do other things, right? So I think, these things will cost, in the sense of we are going to have to put infrastructure or whatever, but it's, at the cost of what? Carneros, go ahead, man.
I'm going to say, I hope. One of the things I don't know is how much money CCP has in the bank right now and how long they can carry a game if activity and monetization drops. There will be some people, I think, that log off for a while and say, okay, I'll come back later when they fix it. We've seen that happen a couple times in the past. I just hope they have the runway to carry something like this.
Yeah. Well, and we don't know how it's going to play out, right? We assume that, this is great for hunters and they're going to basically be able to creep up on anybody who's grazing and stuff. But I'm thinking we have no idea. There's so many different ways this affects the game. For example, an interceptor going through deep space will not essentially be detected unless they're scanned down, right? Because they can't be stopped by bubbles now. Now they can't even be seen. So they can get to a gunner position at a Citadel without really even being seen. So that there's all kinds of different ways that may help defense. It may help offense. It depends on how this shakes out and how players who are creative figure things out. Lieutenant Condor, I see your question. I don't know. Are you in here? Yes, you're in here. 1 second. Condor, what's up?
Just a quick question here with this whole chat system, approaching it from a different angle. How's it going to affect the streaming meta, especially for these large battles or even battles with no local chat? You don't know the numbers of people coming into system.
We're losing you. Your connection's bad. We're losing you. Did you guys understand the question?
Yeah.
How is this going to work out for the streaming meta out there, whether it be individual streamers or whether it be trying to cover large battles and things of that?
Yeah, the drifters got him. Sorry.
We're just going to need a D-scan. I mean, that's the only thing that'll be different. You know, we won't have an easy number to point to.
We're going to see more streams that are like only dedicated to watching a specific Stargate or a specific Keepstar Intel streams.
I think it's interesting because one of the things that, at least back when I was starting the game, that you had to be good at was probing things down. Like, to be a combat prober was important because you needed to find things when you were hunting around to try to kill things, and that was in low sec mostly. But I think that skill is going to be in demand again, and I think that is a skill.
I think it'll be harder for streamers that are not in the know, I guess, because following big groups, right? You know, you can just see them. You can pop in a couple of systems really quick to see, you know, if there's like a 200-man fleet moving, and you heard about them 10 minutes ago in X system, you can sort of follow the path that you think, and as soon as you see them in local, you're good, right? But if you didn't see them in local, then you would just hop into another system really quick and you just kind of ping around until you find them. So I think that will be interesting, especially in nullsec with some of the systems. The gates are so far apart that, you know, people can be off of DScan, you know, relatively quickly. So being able to track them will be much more difficult, but just going to the place where they're at, you know, if you have that kind of intel, then that'll be unaffected.
Ron, I totally agree. From a warfare perspective, okay, I find this local change to probably be pretty damn good for creating more of a fog of war effect, right? Being able to track enemy fleet movements and that, other than the spies everybody's got in the damn fleets, you know, it's like, from a fog of war perspective, I think that will be legit cool. And in fact, you know, years ago during Dominion sovereignty, like, you know, we spitballed a thing where SBUs in a system would actually shut off local in that system. All right. So I love the fog of war aspect of it. My larger questions are, in between war, in between large scale fleet activities or that kind of stuff, what does it mean for sort of the day-to-day kind of, you know, just activity? So I'm like split on this whole local thing. I really am, because it's like, I don't want to see CCP take a hit. I don't want to see the game take a hit. But I think that there are some positive aspects of it that we'll just need to see how it plays out. Because here's the thing, right? Organized nullsec will adapt. Period. End.
Correct. Which is why I don't think it's going to be a problem at all. I mean, it's not like they're taking local out of high sec. I can understand then if people be worried that people would start canceling accounts and stuff like that, because we all know that the high sec guys are the least adaptable people in the game, and that's just the way they are.
But I think we
I
do have a
don't think
serious
HiSec actually
Malcanis'
needs
law thing here.
I don't think HiSec uses local quite that much. But I will say that one of the things that I'm concerned about is the fact that we use Intel or local for all kinds of information outside of military organizational stuff. Like, so now if there's a big battle, we won't know how many people are there. We always use local to know, what the peak was and all that kind of stuff. Now we're going to have to rely on CCP telling us how big any given fight was.
You think that's going to cause people to quit playing the game?
All right, I'll bring in Caleb and Le Routier in case they have something they want to say.
I'm just curious about starting to hear the actual comments from the big Nullsec entities about this, because it's been discussed before as a solution to some of the gameplay lack in Null.
Well, we have Hyper Viper in here. Maybe we can let him talk. Go ahead, Ash.
I was just going to say, I found that while a lot of people have called for that, a lot of the people that have called from it are not from Nullsec. A lot of wormholers, for instance, want local to be removed from Nullsec. And I don't know if this is necessarily a great thing, because it really seems to homogenize Nullsec and wormholes to me.
So I'd like to say that as someone who spends a lot of time in Wormhole and uses it to roam Nullsec when I have time to, I do not particularly like seeing Nullsec turn into wormhole space. I do not like the way locals has been used, so I like the shake-up in the meta. I like Intel tools being obsolete or something, but I do not particularly think Nullsec should be like wormhole space.
I mean, there are definitely philosophical issues behind that. Look, I think this whole thing with the drifters lately and whatnot has had two aspects to it. I think it's had, the mechanics and gameplay aspect to it. That's highly debatable. But then there's also a philosophical argument about, what is the controlling sort of thing out in player-driven nullsec, right? I think the same thing here kind of, comes into play philosophically. Should it be like wormholes? Wormholes were sort of a distinct kind of place. There was a reason why. And I get, you can sit there and like say, well, the lore is now telling you that there's a reason why here, but whatever, non-consensual.
But Dirk, the thing is, just removing local does not suddenly make nullsec like wormholes.
No,
I think people need to recognize that.
Brisk, are you getting a massage? Because I feel totally relaxed.
My damn kid has got this overwatch in the background. Hold on.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I felt like it was
the point that now that my massage is over, the thing that's frustrating to me, it's like one of the big things, and I'm an all nullsec player, other than when I'm pretending to be the wormhole CSM. One of the biggest issues with nullsec has been for the last 2 or 3 years that it's too safe. Everybody says it's too safe. We all say it's too safe. Even those of us who live here say it's too safe. One of the reasons why it's too safe is 100% perfect intel. And local was never designed, was never supposed to be a 100% perfect intel tool. Homar has said it on multiple occasions. We've all talked about it. It's an issue. And the fact is, if you know at all times everybody that's in your system, then you're going to engage in a different type of behavior that is completely risk averse than if you don't know and you're not 100% sure. If you're not 100% sure, you have to take your best guess on whether or not the system is dangerous or not. And that's what happens when you have cloaky campers in a system. That creates that risk. You got to guess, all right, is this guy AFK or is he watching me right now? And that makes the game more interesting. Now we're taking away cloaky camping because we're taking away local, so everybody has to take that risk. And I think it's going to get built in eventually into how people go out and how they handle themselves in nullsec. I think you're going to see fewer crab fits on supers, which is good. They should be better, tanked. I think you're going to see more tankier fits on Rorquals because they know they're going to have to take the risk if they're out there that they're going to get dropped because they're not going to know what's around them unless they're scouting, 24/7 on an alt. So I think this is good. It makes nullsec less safe. That I think is in the best interest of the game. It keeps it interesting, and it's still fundamentally a PvP mechanic. It's not some bullshit drifter thing that's designed to just make us do busy work. This is real, it creates better opportunities for hunters. It creates more meaningful gameplay for the guys that are farming. And yeah, the farmers are going to have to do a better job protecting themselves, but that's good. But they've got umbrellas already anyway. So if you're doing what you got to do, this is not going to be a bad change, and it shouldn't be hard to adapt to.
And as far as I remember, if they're going to introduce something like the communication towers and that type of structure, first step of changing that stuff would be to remove local, so you can then pretty much give it to the players to then reinstall it or something similar, or change the conditions on when you show up in local, right?
Exactly right. Give them a choice. Let them decide. All right, this is a module that I have to decide to put in the TCU or not, or the iHub or whatever. If I put something in, then I can't put something else in. So if I want local intel, okay, that's great, but that means I can't put a Sinojammer on or something like that. I think that would be interesting, and it creates meaningful choices that folks that are, running the territory need to figure out.
All right.
One problem I would see would be, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, for us, for the big block null groups, I think we have the man hours and the resources, but what about the smaller groups? Well, I mean, I wonder how they'll be affected, right?
Yeah, that was going to be my point.
That was the Malcanis' law thing that I was mentioning before, right? Because again, organized null, okay, the ones that everybody hates because it's safe in their area because they made it safe. They're a different story. Whether it be the drifters issue, whether it be a non-local nullsec, these are the people that are going to find the way to adapt to it. I think, okay, better. We can always say, for the children, right? For the smaller groups and whatnot. But, hey, whatever.
But are there really that many smaller groups left? I mean, nullsec is basically big empires and their renters, and that's it. What smaller groups own Sob in their own right anymore?
There's plenty of them. They're mostly pets. That being said, another problem I see is, yeah, well, it's not quite the same thing. But anyway, the another problem I see is nullsec bearers are just taking this on the chin, and they've got absolutely no compensation. Like, it's not even we're removing the previous gameplay and giving you less ISK per hour or making you work more for your ISK. It's you're going to have to do the same thing you were doing before, except it's going to be harder. So I mean, psychologically, it's going to be tough for them.
Yeah, it's interesting the psychology of taking something away.
That's a better way to balance anomalies and ISK generation and mineral creation.
Yeah,
rather
that's
than
not my
just flat
point.
nerfing stuff. But it's my point, and what I'm saying is that the way of doing this, I think, is better than simply saying, all right, we're creating too many minerals in nullsec, let's nerf the mineral output. Instead, they're requiring you, because they're changing intel, to protect yourself in a way that has an impact on the way you fit your ship, on how much you can mine, how much you can rat. That's a soft nerf, but it also gives people the opportunity to make the decision for themselves. Either they can take the risk and run with a ratting fit with no tank and die, or they can lose their ticks a little bit and be a little bit safer. That puts it back in the hands of the player. I think that's a good way to do balancing rather than just whacking things with a nerf pad.
But is it really, right? You're pretty much putting time sink and a stress factor in instead of flattening a faucet. I don't necessarily see that as a good thing.
Well, CCP has said in the past that they don't want to balance the game on money. They don't. They say balancing on income is a poor way to balance. That was CCP Fozzie who said that. So we can assume that CCP doesn't want to make something more expensive to nerf it.
No, but I'm saying that flattening or changing faucets and introducing bottlenecks is at least something that everyone can start dealing with. When you add a time sink, it's not equal to everyone.
I think turning off a faucet is not equal to everyone too, right? If in this case, say the Imperium is making 100 million per hour, and because they can generate that through multi-boxing and the safe conditions that they've built, and then you have a small guy that can only make 1 million per hour. Turning off that faucet affects one group more than the other.
Well, that's why you got to stop treating every nail, or treating everything like a nail and just dropping a hammer on it, right? You got to get a little more. You got to get a little more complex with how you want to, regulate that kind of thing. However, this is Eve, and they're going to treat it like a freaking nail.
But I think this is interesting because they're not just doing the typical let's nerf this, buff that. They're saying like, okay, this game isn't played necessarily as the game itself, right? People play it with the meta sphere associated with it. For instance, a lot of the drumming up of support of attacking high sec is a message being sent to CCP, the company, saying we don't like these drifters. That's not something inside the game. That's a message being sent outside the game using the game as a platform.
Depletion and strain is not the same for everyone. The bigger the organization, the easier it is to press in a lot of people in a goon hole and just suck that infinite faucet. It's the infinite factor that's the problem, and CCP has not plugged that yet. So it's not equal because other groups in Null don't even get close to capacity.
That's what I'm saying. This is CCP is looking at depletion or strain on actual people's hours when they play, because they can't do stuff as easily AFK or whatever, as ways of tinkering with like the velocity of their accumulation of power.
Yeah, but straining on man hours and players, numbers of players,
and straining
only
trust.
benefits the. I'd say this is a benefit to the big blocks and not the small guys.
But wasn't that the argument as well when they made the most recent war commerce? People were basically saying, yeah, you're gonna reduce the mining yield by 20%, but the people in the big blocks, like the Imperium, they will have a much easier way to adapt to that by basically making yet another war call out to compensate for the 20% loss, while the smaller guy is going to have a much harder time catching up.
I'm not saying it's
right.
good or bad.
That's exactly what they said. I mean, that's exactly what they said. So I think that's why I think in the end, giving players the choice of what they want to do and making them take a risk is a better alternative than just throwing a flat nerf out at people. Because you can always N+1 a flat nerf. You can't N+1 more risk because it's more risk. You don't know where it's coming from. And you can try to do that, but N+1 just means one more target in space. So I'm not going to complain about that. So in the end of the day, I'd rather them do things like this that have more meaningful change and potentially could have a greater impact on, proliferation and stuff like that, because it means more stuff's going to die, than just random nerfs that just piss people off.
I tend to disagree on the N+1 effect on risk. Like the Imperium, for example, is the main example of how N+1 reduces risk, just because you've got economies of scale in security.
Somebody was asking me. They brought up the the little guy thing again before, right? One of the answers I threw out there is, look, I think this is going to likely impact renters, right? Why would you want to remain isolated in kind of a higher risk environment? Like what renting is, right? You rent in a place where hopefully there is a landlord who is there to ensure the integrity of the sovereignty and sort of things like that, right? From literal invasion, right? If you're a renter, which is what I would consider to be the modern day sort of small nullsec guy, because each one of those groups tends to be pretty independent, even though they're under this bigger banner and whatnot. I mean, if I was a renter, and I was at one point, I'd go find the best skirt I could find to hide under. I mean, why would you continue to operate in an environment where you're isolated like that? When what you can probably do is find an organization out there that you can continue to do what it is you were doing, which is pretty much earn.
Yeah. People look for safety, but here's what drives them away from groups. And I say this knowing full well NC.PL, all the groups are essentially the same in this respect, is the cultural differences. Like if I'm cringing at what NC is saying, it's hard for me to stay there. even though I have to out of safety, and you start to get a balance of like, well, I'm making money, but God, I hate when these guys talk for me. Like my values are totally against what they're doing, but man, I'm making money. Like that starts to become a balance. And so I think that people have always been in a bad situation when they have had to rent from some other group and, you know, get yelled at by Lady Scarlet or whatever else. And so I wonder, like, if it's going to be, I wonder if the cultural pressure to be on your own is enough to offset I'm going to make a bunch of money in this new environment.
It depends. It just depends on what you want your day to day, to be like, right? Again, as a renter, okay, back in the day, under the Russians, never had a single issue. There was nothing oppressive about it. It was like you basically paid your ISK to be there and did your own thing. All right. However, if it's an environment that kind of, causes you to, in a way, it's a profit and loss sort of thing, along with an enjoyability factor thrown in, right? Those people are going to have to determine whether or not the new situation suits their needs.
Yeah.
Well, if you make being a small guy non-viable or really not competitive at all, then some people just stop playing. Like, for example, I do not want to join a big block, as in I do not want to be to the sort of life that of living in Test or Legacy of the Imperium, which I'm not saying it's bad or whatever, just do not want to do it. If it's the only competitive way to play the game, then I will just stop playing, for example.
I just pinged Dran, and he is the number 2 at Test, and he's the head of Legacy. And and I asked him what he thought about this, and he, agreed. He said he loves the local change, and he said his only concern was he just echoed Carneros earlier, which was he just hopes that they pause the Drifter event, so it's in a mechanics vacuum, so they have good data about it. But I, as well, like I think this is going to be great and it'll be a lot of fun and it's exciting. So, on our side, rock on, man.
Well, just, let me just say real quick, because we do have a couple of these people out in Twitch chat, which are your typical Knowles crying and yada yada. Listen to me. This is a seriously mixed. Oh well. I'm not doing that all over again.
All right, you're saying that
not everybody's crying, even though I know that there are people out there who, anytime somebody brings up anything that is against a change or anything like that, right? The easy suckers mantra is basically, "Oh, quit your whining." I don't think it's that. I think that there are a bunch of nuanced sort of views of both the Drifter thing as well as the local stuff that is today's freaking, drama du jour, that come into play here. Even though I know that we are going to have some people out in chat that it's just mentally easier for them to lob a ball like that.
Well, it's also easy to just be against everything. I mean, that's the safe thing to do. It's just, oh, this sucks, this awful, CCP's ruining the game. Despite the fact that half the time when people say that, it's after CCP agrees to do something that the community's been begging for.
There are definitely people out there just crying. Okay, there are definitely people out there just crying.
Oh,
Probably
I agree.
in places like the forums, go after them, not the people that are actually trying to have a discussion.
The issue here is that the populations of Eve are not a monolith, and yet we frequently consider them as such, right? And we get these opinions and these ideas about and generalizations about other sections of space. So, for instance, as a high sec player, maybe they feel that they've heard from people like nullsecers, oh well, HTFU, you got to just adapt and all this other stuff, adapt and die, all this other stuff. And so when they see it from what they think of as the people who have been so heartless to them, then they respond with almost like a sense of irony in their heartlessness back. But the problem is that, as you pointed out, these are often different groups of people. The people that are super heartless and the people that are actually like, hey, let's work things out, are not always the same people. And yet, because we lump people into these big groups, we often allow ourselves to become very jaded and cold-hearted towards one another.
Well, that's Eve. In a way, it's just Eve.
But that's real life too. I mean,
yeah,
Ash's point is absolutely. I mean, that's just how it is, and
it is.
I think it's. I mean, but you're absolutely right, because it's funny, because I was on Reddit earlier this morning, and I made a comment about time that they finally did this on local. Somebody responded, "Wow, Brisk, I can't believe you're saying this." I'm like, guys, it was on my fucking website. I campaigned on making local less of an intel tool last year. I mean, I don't know what else I'm going to say. They finally did it. Why am I going to complain about that? You know,
you're so brave. You're so brave, Brisk.
I know.
So much courage,
exactly.
Brisk.
Now when they get rid of
I can't believe
asset safety, it's going to be even better.
Can I squeeze
all the other problem that we run into is that people get these ideas of like these high level ideas that sound like it'll fix everything. Like, we should shake up the sandbox. But nobody ever like thinks about what it would take to do that and what it looks like in the practical. And not just for this, but like several, like Phoebe jump changes is another good example of things where people were asking for something, but then when the tools that were put in to make that thing happen were put in, people freak out because nobody wants that, like the cost.
Everybody likes the idea. They don't want the implementation.
Well, because sometimes the idea that they bring up, right, that they talk about and they think, oh, this will be great, when actually implemented into the game, and then you see how the game shifts because of the aggregate players out there and how they deal with it, they sit there and go, oh, maybe this wasn't what I thought I wanted.
Speaking of shaking up the sandbox, yesterday we were streaming, and right after we stopped, there was a giant earthquake that happened in California, in Southern California. 6.6, and then it reduced to 6.4 when they reported it, and that was right after we stopped. So everybody's okay, no damage anywhere in LA. A few roads broke, but that was felt in Nevada, Los Angeles, and all the way up to the Central Valley near Sacramento. So yeah, I just thought I'd mention
California didn't fall into the ocean again?
Not yet.
Shit.
But we shook for, it was different because we shook for about a minute, which is very long. So that's a big earthquake. You just, since it wasn't big and rough, you figure it was far away, and it was. Hundreds of miles into the Mojave Desert area. Okay, so any more on this Blackout? Because I wanted to transition to what the next shoe to drop might be, asset safety removal.
Yeah.
Unless you guys have
fantastic.
Something.
Oh, no, that's fine. The local thing, I think we probably killed.
All right. Yeah, we probably killed that to death. But let's see. We had something that came up. It was a little, you can see it there, changes in drifter tactics. It says Interbus, it's French. Interbus refuses to comment on results of border transport services. That snipe had a lot of people predicting that after this next wave of things to happen, the blackout, that you may see asset safety get removed or something happening to asset safety.
This is not the first shot across the bow, by the way. The last scope video had something about both the fluid router and the SEC. So this is a thing.
But that's the basis of the speculation, though, isn't it? But it's still very much a wild speculation. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I mean, it is speculation, but I'm not sure if I'd call it wild. CCP generally doesn't point to things like this unless it's a thing, especially not twice in a row.
So what you're saying that they usually hint at what they're going to do next inside these snipes?
Yeah, it's like a foreshock, as it were. Like, you'll see pieces moving in the story or whatever before they explode into the limelight when they're in the little ticker things or in the world news. They have a world news feed that almost nobody reads on the actual website where they put out like 4 or 5 news stories every few days. So
Okay.
this idea of the SEC, the SEC and the border regions and being able to deal with transportation and stuff has been under threat since before the drifters, because Case Green Magic with the Sancha is also threatening transportation, especially through low sec regions. So they've been zeroing in on this problem for a little while.
So really quick, I just got called into the fleet. There's drifters spawning, so I'm gonna have to go.
Drifter
Exciting.
spawning. Duty call.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ron.
Yeah,
Duty
bigger
calls.
than the last group. They're saying there's like 5 battleships and all this other stuff. So yeah, very exciting. I'll talk to you guys after.
Let us know. So
Have fun storming the castle.
Drifters attacking again. Blackout looming and possible asset safety removal. Oh my God, the sky is falling.
There's been a lot of talk about asset safety again, over the years, right? I think people need to understand kind of what the origins of that were. It wasn't really for the players that were in space as much as maybe, CCP's old mantra of your stuff's all still here kind of a thing, right? But go ahead, take away asset safety, all right? Again, the organized groups, there's plenty of NPC stations to store stuff in. It's all about, risk assessment and then mitigation, right? It will be handled.
Mm-hmm.
For most groups. For other groups, maybe not so much. So maybe that's a boon to whoever goes and attacks them or whatever.
What do you mean by it will be handled? What does that entail?
Most likely, okay, if you're in a place where you believe that your stuff is legitimately under threat of losing the Citadel or the structure that you have things in, okay, you will put it off. You will put off the excess stuff that you don't want to risk at that level into NPC stations, all right? Because guess what? That can't be. That's just not in it. It's now out of harm's way from the asset safety perspective.
So that, like, basically what the Wormhole people have been doing, kind of.
However they've been. I don't actually know how the Wormhole people are doing. I mean, let me just take Delve as an example. Oh my God, there's a whole bunch of NPC stations that are literally right. So even if they thought that their structures were at risk to the point where they didn't want to have, excess warehouses full of stuff, right? Well, guess what? There's some stations right there to go put it in. No. For other groups, I don't know. It all depends on where you are in space and kind of, what's around you, and but it will ultimately come down to, an assessment of what you believe your risk is, and therefore how much stuff do you want to have piled up in a single warehouse or even, multiple ones in the local area. And maybe that means that players just don't have as much junk laying around. They move it off into, safer places that can't be, contested with an asset safety equation coming into play.
Or just spread it out, really. Right?
Or spread it out, or whatever. I mean,
I also would like to suggest that there are degrees of asset safety between what we have now and nothing. So just because they're reviewing it doesn't necessarily mean that it's like just going to be, now there's no asset safety either. But I mean, that could be it, but there are other ways of going about it that does take into account for people like that are away from the game for a period of time, or, give you a basic level of safety while still having at least some consequence for people who get their stuff burned.
Yeah, I mean, it could be anything from, like, you have to buy an insurance in order to get asset safety, to being the middle ground where 50% could perhaps go straight into space when you shoot a structure, to having all of it go into space like we have in Wormholes. We don't know.
taken together,
Well,
do these feel like a rebalancing of? I'm shifting this a little bit, but taken together, you look at it. It used to be, well, a while ago, it used to be that if you were friends or owned a casino in EVE Online, you could generate a ton of money based on the boredom of other players that are gambling, filling your pockets full of money. And that money was distributed to whoever the heck they wanted to. And it was fine until it became political and used to enhance certain groups. And then it was unassailable wealth and a problem in EVE Online. And that gets chopped out of the game. So the next best way of living was create an empire, secure it, and let and then I think what happened was it became distorted because by securing it, you're securing large mining operations because the Rorqual was buffed. So now empire building and having a big structure and having super capitals sitting to defend everything became a model that really was a winning solution. And the people who were just small roving bands of marauders, let's say PL or Skill U, but before they took over all that space that collapsed, like these groups were basically their play style was out of favor, or even high sec, people surrounding moons and saving or controlling moons and stuff like that. So that kind of gameplay was suppressed quite a bit. That's why Skill U left. That's why they said. Then you have another complete shift, and that is pressure on large organizations or any organizations in nullsec because their structures get attacked. It looks like higher populated ones are attacked more. And then you have local going out, so you can't tell who's in your space or not. And then you have asset safety removal. Like, is it now better and more advantageous not to have a giant empire? Is this a seismic shift of
I actually think it's
what works?
It's the opposite. I think it's the opposite. And that's because I think that all we're looking at right now is the things being taken away. So if you pay attention to what CCB said for like the last year, one of their biggest goals is to take away more and more of the things that are just done automatically and hand them to the players to manage themselves. That's why I said things like the comms tower and stuff like that. So I would not be surprised. In fact, I would be surprised if it was just a simple matter of, all right, now you don't have any local and asset safety. New nullsec, go have fun. Like, that doesn't feel right to me. I think that this is actually a securing of the empire, and the fact that now there's a different kind of infrastructure that is required for an empire to be fully functional.
And a lot of these topics were on the table when structures were rolled out, or just before it was rolled out. So it's,
I mean, part of the problem with the asset safety in general is, again, it goes to this whole point of making nullsec too safe. I mean, it makes losses meaningless. It makes it easy to hide your stuff and quit the game for months at a time and come back and everything's still there. It's one of these things where I feel like one of the reasons why a lot of us liked when it went into Rage was because we've got these two big keep stars. They can't get all their stuff out, so we're going to get it. That's a motivator to get people to fight. If you are the owner of the Alamo and you have to fight, or at least go down, or you're going to lose everything, then you're going to fight to save it, or at least try.
But I mean,
that doesn't happen anymore. Look at NC Dot. All of their keep stars blown the fuck up. What happened? They just moved stuff. Imagine if you couldn't do that. Imagine if it wasn't as easy as just asset safety everything out to LOSEC. I think that creates more content. I think it creates more interesting content. And I think that it creates the kind of fights that we wanted Citadels to create, but they don't, because Citadels are meaningless because they're easily spammable, they're easily replaceable, and you don't lose any of your stuff that's inside.
Assuming that the fights were going to happen between entities where it wasn't just raffle stomp, I totally agree with you. You know what I mean? However, going back to the conversation that took place back when destructibility of stations, was which became destructibility of citadels and things. The thing was, man, the hell purge for tiers is going to be a thing if asset safety didn't exist. And maybe that's a
bad
good thing. Well, it depends.
Because I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing. I don't know about you. I think it's
probably do because of the side that we're on.
No, even if
Believe
look,
it or not,
even
on a
if
different
even if
side.
somebody were to come in and hit a system that I had a ton of shit in, I would give me a reason to defend it. Make it a fight that has value. Make it meaningful. Make us claw and scrape and fight every little bit because we don't want to lose all this stuff. That's fun. I mean,
Let me give you.
I think that's cool.
A cool. Sorry, Brisk.
Okay.
No, but I agree with Brisk on this one, and I'm gonna give you an example as to why I do. My corporation used to have. Well, we still have a wormhole, and we got to the point. It's a C2 class wormhole. We got to the point where we became sort of inactive. We had a shitload of structures and a lot of they were basically looping at us. And then someone decided we're going to try to evict these guys. So when that happened, I had to put so many hours into trying to organize a defense, which kind of activated all of those inactives we had in the corporation. They suddenly, well, some of them showed up. And I reached out to, I know that Teddy is in chat now, to Senior's Trajectory and Stranger Danger. And all of a sudden I was communicating with all of these different entities in Wormhole space, trying to defend our space. So even though that was a quite sucky thing to happen, like we would lose tens and tens of billions, or in some wormholes it's hundreds of billions, it did create content. It actually made people play together to show up. And in the end, we had, I think, 2 major battles. We were fighting with like 50 ravens against an opponent we were uncertain if we could beat or not, but it was like literally fighting to the death. So yeah, asset safety does commit you to actually taking fights, to have content in the game, to get people to play together. And I think that's the key point that makes it worthwhile, because if there's something we need, the comparison is very, very reasonable when you look at NC, where they can just, no, we're going to take the losses from the structures because we still get the stuff out of there. If they were to lose all of those titans that could have been in those structures, I'm very certain that they would actually show up and do the very best to try to defend them.
I think that's an important point, right? The whole titans and supers, where you are actually parking them when you are building an empire.
Alternately, there's looking at it from the other side would be a help against Citadel spell. Bulging in the industry in the wormhole space is when you have a low power Citadel in places like that particular corporation going inactive, then there will be people willing to do the work of busting them up just because to see what Santa Claus brought when they go boo. So a form of asset safety where at least low power structures would not surrender things to asset safety would probably be an incentive to clearing up all the space trash. A bit like CCP did when they started handing out kill mails for bubbles.
I would also like to add that I know that you disagree on this one, Dirk, or I think you do. But the fact that if you do have that possibility of getting some sweet loot in terms of stuff dropping out of the structure, I think that encourages people to actually attack those structures as well. Because God knows that bashing structures in EVE at the moment, it's insanely boring. People might say otherwise due to spins and narratives, but it's not fun. It's not something that you go like, oh shit, what should I do today? Oh no, I want to bash some structures. But if you add the element that you can actually get a reward from doing it, that sort of creates content as well. And I think that's one of the driving factors as to why corporations in wormhole space actually actively go out and try to evict people to get their stuff. So all in all, I am all in favor for asset safety. I think it's a good thing for the game.
Hold on. I do agree with you. I think that it will lead to more activity out there. But I'm going to repeat what I said in Twitch chat, that there's a difference between losses in space and losses of accumulated wealth, so to speak, okay? The things that are stored in these loot pinatas, right? But I'm game. Let's see how it plays out. I just think that it's going to be unlikely it will be the majors going after each other before they go farm tiers from the more easily subjugated. Like plain and simple.
Why wouldn't we do that anyway? But Dirk, why wouldn't we do that now?
Well, because you can go out there and kind of farm for the in-space stuff, right? Or even to hit their structures and things like that, right? But if you know that there's an even better payoff for it, man, go out there. you're always going to hit the guy you can stomp on first.
But if the guy that I know I can stomp on doesn't have anything, what's the point?
Well, I guess
I think the whole thing I think there is you're going to see the big guys going after the other big guys, because if you can find a way to trap like a super fleet and a keep star and then kill the keep star, that's great. I mean, that's fun. That's fun gameplay, and that requires strategy and tactics, and it requires everybody thinking of ways to, all right, how are we going to do this? How are we going to block these guys in? How are we going to maneuver them so that they can't move their stuff around, and hitting their move ops and all that other kind of stuff? It creates a lot of potential content.
Now you can
because
actually
there's stuff
kill
to
an
lose.
alliance. Right?
Correct. Exactly.
One of the things
just,
that, you know,
because
sorry. Go ahead, Brisk. I
that low.
No, I just look. I said the bottom line for me has been I've been in Nullsec now for like 4 years, and I haven't been here forever. I spent most of my career in HighSec. HighSec's different, and and that's where I think all the casuals are. I think the folks that are worried about casuals in Nullsec, Nullsec is not for casual players. It shouldn't be. At least if they want to come and they want to have a good time and stuff like that with your Karma Fleet or something like that, that's okay. But the bulk of these players that are going to be in groups that are active, and you need to be active if you're down here. If you decide you want to go AFK or something, then move your stuff to Lowsec. But the bottom line is, Nullsec is too safe. The fights aren't as meaningful when there's nothing to fight over, and we're stuck in an empire system where SOV doesn't matter because nobody wants more SOV. Everybody's got the SOV that they want. So we're not arguing over space. So what are we fighting over? In-game politics, regional complaints, or long-term grudge matches type stuff. There needs to be a reason to fight in order to generate the kind of friction that you need to have these big wars. You need something to fight over, and no asset safety and loot dropping. Loot is something to fight over, and people do it. I mean, literally, that is why we went into rage to take out, HK's keep stars, because they were filled with loot. We can say whatever else we wanted to why we did it. The bottom line was we were going to get paid if we did it. I think you're going to see a lot of groups go out and do that kind of stuff if they know they can do it. And I understand Dirk's point, we're going to stomp on the little guys first, but the little guys don't have the kind of stuff that we want to take. If you kill a keep star and a bunch of Titans pop out, people are going to show up for that. It's going to be fun.
Well, yeah, I guess.
And if one DQ ever falls, the service will take a break for 1 day to actually crunch the kill mail.
That's interesting, though, because now you can finally kill an alliance, which is what I was trying to say, or you can severely damage it, and then now the stakes go up. If this happens, we don't know if it's going to happen. If asset safety is removed, and people lose their stuff that they actually accumulated over a long period of time, I think it may have terrible effects to retention, but at the same time, now you're talking about real damage. And I think that's the problem there's something going on in Nullsec right now. There's a feeling of things don't matter. And I know everybody says, we're fighting a lot. Look, watch us fight. And it just feels like, so what? But now if you're saying like, hey, massive stakes on the table and you have to play, you can't just bow out. Now it seems like it's getting more interesting.
But you bring up a good point, Matterall. I mean, look, when was the last time an alliance disbanded because they lost a war? I can't remember off the top of my head. Alliances disband because of spies. They disband because everybody quits and they're tired and they don't want to play the game anymore. Nobody dies because of wars anymore. And that's I think that's a sad state of affairs where like you can't go to war against somebody and say we want to kill these guys and then know that even when no matter how hard you stomp them, they're going to come back. I think adding that little bit more risk is kind of fun. It creates fun. And I don't think just because an alliance dies, the players are going to quit playing. But I do think it's interesting to see how little, at least the last couple of years, the map has really changed because there hasn't really been a ton to fight over. The last 2 years, I think it's been pretty stale in Nullsec, and anything that changes that up, I think, is probably going to be helpful.
Yeah, it's not that they die. Players don't necessarily leave. So maybe some leaders that are burnt out leave, but that creates a new, people fragment. The corp CEO becomes more powerful because now he's saying like, what do we want to do, guys? We got these options. We performed well in this war. People noticed us, and we have this option for an alliance, or we have this option for an alliance. And that type of stuff used to happen a lot. I'm not sure if it happens anymore, but
here's the counterintuitive thing. So we had one guy, 510, ask me in Discord chat, and he said, okay, so once you lost everything, everyone quits. that wasn't the thing that happened. I mean, we suffered a quite devastating defeat in that wormhole. What actually happened was that everyone in this corporation I'm in, we kind of bonded together. So everyone actually became more committed into playing the game. We're always talking about how the best thing for a new player to retain them is actually for that player to suffer loss. But it only matters if you're in the context of having other people to support you while you suffer that kind of loss. So that's basically what happens as a corporation, where you risk everything, and you have those core players that are dedicated to playing the game and want to play it. They bond together, and that's a bonding experience that kind of manifests the activity levels going forward.
Exactly.
To the same extent,
IMR is
where
100%.
yeah, so like for example, Teddy and his corporation, Sinus they showed up to help us. We tried our best to defend the wormhole, and what followed, you're going to be welcome to chime in here soon, Teddy. But what followed was that basically Teddy said, shit guys, do you want to join with us instead? So all of a sudden, we were in our little bubble, isolated, coming out of it. Even though we lost everything, we were literally stronger, more committed, more engaged in the game, and we had more options going forward as well, thanks to that thing happening.
To Populo's point, look, here's what happens when it happens to 30,000 people. We've already seen what happens when it happens to 30,000 people. World War B, the Casino War, whatever you want to call it. The fact is, goons had the entire rest of the server fighting them, being funded by casinos to do it. And you know what? They got their asses kicked. And Declan was taken away from them. So what did they do? They went to Delve and they beat the game, according to everybody. I mean, the reality is, getting your ass kicked like that creates a kind of bonding that even winning doesn't always create. And the guys that went through that together, and I fly with a bunch of them in Karma Fleet, and I fly with a bunch of them in Init, they went through that, they saw that, they're still playing the game, they lost a ton of stuff. They lost billions worth of ISK, but they're still playing the game, and they're back with their friends, and they have created a massive empire, the likes of which no one has ever seen, and nobody thought that was going to happen. They all thought these guys were going to die, and that was the goal. So the reality in this game, I fully expect if somebody loses all their stuff, they're going to get mad, they're going to rage quit, they're going to go out of the house, they're going to go in the sunshine for a little while. At some point, if this game, the bug has bit you, you will be back, and you will realize that you are a $100 Plex thing away from 10 billion ISK worth of ships, and you will go back and you will find a way to climb back out and play the game again. And it doesn't matter if you lose your stuff, because that's Eve. Every time, the first time you went out PvPing in your rookie ship and you lost it, you lost everything you had. You got to get used to that. It's when people get this irrational attachment to pixels, when the reality is it's about the fun that you have and the people that you fly with. Losing all your stuff can be some of the most fun you may ever have. It depends on the game and who you're playing with. So I think changing something like this to asset safety, if it creates more friction and results in more fighting, then I think it'll be good for the game. And I think short term, yes, maybe some people will get mad and walk away, but they'll be back, because everybody that says, "Oh, I'm quitting forever," unless you get banned, you're going to be back. It's just the nature of it.
Okay, Senator, you're out of time. Teddy, you wanted to say?
It seems to happen to a lot of Wormhole Corps. Well, they'll get evicted and they'll immediately just start bouncing back. It happened to HK after the initiative evicted them. They moved to a 2-5 null and just became huge again. It happened to Stranger Danger when Inner Hell evicted them. It happened to Post Party last year when Shekel Squad evicted them. Like, the actual siege produces such an aspect of camaraderie that it strengthens the core of the corp to such a point that then they can then just bounce back immediately.
Was that Ash?
Yeah, I was just going to say that it could easily be argued that goons are the way that they are now, in part because of the way that Bob treated them in the early days of Eve. They were very oppressive to them, and instead of being discouraging, goons hardened and then found allies and then formed Red Swarm and eventually took down Bob. So, this is absolutely, this is that pivotal moment thing that Hilmar's been talking about, but on a grander scale.
Brisk, I cut you off. Did you finish everything you wanted to say?
No, I was done. I yield back the balance of my
All right, so catching people up, there is something that is definitely going to happen, and that is drifter attacks happening right now. And there's a lot of them in these systems that have the listening towers. You're talking about big waves. That's one thing that's happening right now. What's coming in 48 hours, was it 48 hours? Yeah, at least 48 hours. So you have a couple days, is something new. We don't know if it's permanent, but it looks permanent because they say over the coming days, we'll be changing the way local chat works. That sounds permanent. And it is the blackout. Nullsec will go into delayed mode. By delayed mode, they mean wormhole space style delayed mode, which means it's an opt-in. If you don't type anything, you will never show up on local. And I guess that's technically delayed mode because you can set the channel to delayed mode, right? So that may be where they got the wording.
Has anybody discussed exactly how powerful Force Recons have suddenly become?
Not yet. Hold on.
Okay.
And the third thing in the future is hints that we have been watching in the scope video. In the ticker, it says changes in drifter tactics. But if you look at the snipe, it says Interbus refuses to comment on results of Border Transport Services review. What that is signaling is that it is possible that asset safety will go away. And there we are. That's the news this morning, and that's what people are talking about. What do you have to say, Ashtarothi?
Well, I was just about to look up the ticker for the previous one that referenced it, but now I don't remember.
That's all right. So we caught you all up on what's going on. Some people wanted to... Oh, you know what I wanted to talk to you about, Ashtarothi, and we didn't get to this yet on the program. We're going to go a little long today. What happened yesterday in HiSec? That was super interesting in the middle of the day.
Oh, right. Yeah. So Semiki is the headquarters of Arataka Research Consortium, which is one of the largest player organizations that focuses on the actual universe's actions. They were formed, I think, shortly after the Drifters appeared in order to do research on them and the Drifter hives, et cetera, et cetera. So they have been involved in all of this for quite some time. Over the course of the last several months, their structures in Semiki, which is where they collect all their trinary data stuff for their research for the Triglavians, has received a lot of attention. Concord has asked them to hand over all of their stuff or else they would blow them up. They had to go to Caldari State to ask for help. But then the Drifters started attacking, so they've reinforced their structures a few times. We see this as a test bed for what we saw in Nullsec now. But 2 days ago, Sancha showed up and reinforced a couple of their structures. And then the day before, so 3 days ago now that happened. And then 2 days ago, they showed up again. And then yesterday, when they showed up, from my understanding, they let the timer recharge and then immediately hit it again. So then this Sancha fleet, massive Sancha fleet of diamond Sancha rats from True Creations, which are the diamond rats from the Sodios, I believe. So over 100 of them, nightmares, etc., showed up there bashing this structure, and Uriel communicated with Delegate Zero saying that he was wanting to communicate with the Svarog Clod, which is one of the 3 clods of the Triglavians. So yes. No, I think Makoto runs Arc, but Uriel is the number one guy for Drifters and Jovian lore and history. If you go on the forums, he's the one that writes those huge articles that basically breaks down everything that's going on. So he's one of the dudes that is just really knowledgeable about, in particular, Jovian stuff. So he has these semiosis consoles for Svarog, and he starts broadcasting a message in local, basically telling the Svarog Clod that the corruption is here, because the Svarog is the people that are assigned to basically take care of the corruption, which is Sancha, right? So effectively, it was a distress signal saying, hey, Triglavians, the Sancha is here, come extirpate them. And so the Triglavians do show up, but rather than attacking Sancha, they actually continue to bash the structure until it gets reinforced, and then Sancha warps off. Now, the Triglavian rats were actually from the invasion, or from Abyss. So they couldn't actually be descanned, although the Sancha rats could. Any rate, they kind of maneuver around a little bit, kill some people. Eventually, oddly enough, the Triglavians self-destruct, one group at a time. First the Leshaks, then the Vedmaks, then the Damoviks. But then a whole bunch of drifters showed up, and the Sancha actually fought the drifters. And the drifters destroyed the Sancha fleet, and then the players were able to fight the drifters and destroy what was left. A couple other really weird things happened. First of all, right as the Sancha drifter fight was happening, a bunch of Ishikone Watch ravens appeared, diamond rats from the Caldari state, but they didn't seem to do anything. And then the other weird thing that happened was that the drifters actually engaged Concord, but Concord did not receive any damage and did not respond in any way. So we believe that might have been a bug. Like maybe the ravens were supposed to get involved, and for some reason the AI got confused and so started firing at Concord instead. But altogether, it was about an hour or two of just this really interesting back and forth fight of like, we have no idea what's going on. But the armor timer is today, so we're kind of we're monitoring it. Right. I think the most interesting thing that happened there was the drifters and the Sancha attacking.
My bad, but I'm just showing you video of what happened yesterday, what he's describing, and that is basically
Muted.
I'm not muted anymore, but I was muted. Yeah, to let Ashtarothi talk without noises and stuff. I did that, and I forgot to unmute. Sorry, but I'm just telling you what I said now, and that is we have pictures of Concord being attacked by drifters. This was yesterday in high sec. The Concord was not damaged, but didn't fire back either. So it was just kind of we assume a bug of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, the key to here is that the Sancha and the drifters fought, right? Like that is two groups of rats that like full-on fleets that engaged it with each other. This reminds me of what CCP has kind of been touting over the last couple of months, which is this event that occurred apparently where a bunch of NPCs all fought each other, but no players were involved at all. And so
I think that's a great idea. They should make the drifters do all of that so we don't have to deal with it.
Well, in a way, I feel like they almost took what happened and then they put it like in front of the players, like in prime time. So I don't know where they're going with this. The fact that the Sancha was involved is obviously kind of important because Sancha is like the key person to this whole story that hasn't really made a move yet. But at the same time, it's also really interesting that the drifters fought the Sancha because we didn't have firm understanding of how those two entities saw each other until today or yesterday.
All right. I'm practicing my moderating skills on Twitch. Okay. So that was pretty interesting. What do you make of it? Is it just a singular event happening just to ARC?
Well,
is it a sign of something?
Delegate Zero was directly involved. He's the main storyteller of EVE Online. So, I mean, I imagine that this is going to mean something in the long run. It also is in the ticker. I don't know if you noticed that. There's a comment about Semiki under attack and what happened. So, you know, this is a thing that's important. And as I said earlier, the drifter attacks that we're seeing now in Nullsec was tested on ARC. So
this has
I guess at this point
it has some backstory relevance, right? That the drifters would be interested in that station.
Yeah, like I said, so there's the there's all of this Triglavian data that has been collected over the years, either from the Drifter event that happened with the Quartermaster to the stuff that happened right before the Triglavians were released from the Drifter hulls, all the way through the Trainary data relics and Semiosis consoles that we have now. At any rate, they have had this history of collecting massive quantities of all of these things and bringing them all together and kind of using it as quote-unquote research to work with CCP in order to develop information about things like the drifters.
All right. Yeah, I wanted to get that as part of the record because I think it's interesting. There's a lot of things going on. Most of it's in nullsec these days, but remember, invasions are still happening, right? You're still doing those, right, Ashtarothi?
Oh, absolutely. We actually last week we had an invasion whose foothold was in Uedama, which was pretty awesome because it split HiSec basically in half and made shipping very interesting. But yeah, they're definitely still cropping up. Yesterday or 2 days ago, we had 4 world arcs all at the same time, and then they all went down. CCB actually put out a video or a thing that was like, Capsuleers has finally routed the world arc for the first time, even though it wasn't the first time, so I was kind of confused by that. But now they're building back up. Yesterday they were all scouts reported, but I'm sure there's some that are going to be stabilized by today.
Right. So people are defeating these arcs. We saw you take a wave on. You got to the last wave, it looked like, and you guys all died.
That fight was insane. I gotta pull it out and put it on my YouTube video. It was so much fun. So we did it with 15 people when basically everybody else has done it with like 30 or more that I know of. And we did it with 4 Logi. We made it all the way to the end, actually. We got the payout. The problem is that at the very end, there's what's called the Zorius Challenge, in which things just escalate more and more and more and more and more. So either we've got to be able to deal with that, which probably would have only taken 1 more Logi, we think. We want to try it again. But or you just kill the anchoring and get out before things get too rough. But like, I don't know if in the video it's really interesting. We get the payout right as the final level of the final pylons are actually spawning in. So the fight actually intensifies right as the site is quote unquote over.
Yeah, we'll put up video of that. That was pretty intense. You guys looked like you were busy.
It was fun. It's so fun. It is some of the most fun I've had in Eve. Well, actually, not most fun, but of that kind of like. I mean, obviously, I've played WoW back in the day. I was a raid leader back then. The idea of like these complex raid fights that involve coordination between all the players that we can like collectively go up against and work on and then feel victorious over. Like that's one of the aspects of Eve, or that's one of the aspects of WoW that I've kind of been missing. So the fact that there is this very intense fight that isn't necessarily about how powerful the equipment that you bring is, but more importantly, whether or not you know how to do the right things at the right time. And and it's not like Sancho where it's like a scripted, you kind of know how it plays out. It's more like, if this happens, you need to be ready to do this. If this happens, you need to be ready to do this, which is way more fun. And I know that I've been going back and forth with people about whether or not invasions in the Abyss are good for training people versus PvP. I will say this. Any Logi that can 4 or 5 man a world arc can be a Logi in any fleet.
You can make it here. You can make it anywhere.
If anything, it is full-on Logi training. I don't know, you could argue about FCs or DPS or whether or not that's all real. It feels pretty freaking real when you're Logi.
I think it's interesting that the people who are having a great time right now are people fighting these invasions. And people who aren't having a great time are people who are in nullsec either winning or losing wars.
I do find it really interesting that right now nullsec is very unrewarding. I mean, in one way or another, even the basic rewards that nullsec has are being shut down with ratting and such like that. While HiSec is extraordinarily rewarding right now with increased minerals, increased mining capabilities, the new salvage, the new skill books, the new mutaplasmids that everybody wants. There's all kinds of value coming out of this stuff. So I don't know. I actually hope that whatever's happening to nullsec stops sooner rather than later before we start running into like secondary and third effects like ADMs collapsing because nobody's ratting.
Oh, by the way, thank you, Hoffman. That's the second time you've given out 5 subs to people. You do it anonymously. That is super generous. Thank you for doing that. That's awesome.
Did he just do it anonymously? So you called him out by name?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you can. I don't know if you can do it anonymously.
Not really anonymously.
You can't really do it anonymously, but he does. In other words, he gives subs to people to wipe out commercials and all that kind of stuff for people.
Yeah, he's a great guy,
and that's awesome. Really appreciate that. This is what
I would say that.
Yeah.
I would say that Imar also did that too as well. So.
Who did?
Imar.
Oh, Imar.
Thank you, Imar.
Imar, awesome.
No, but the thing is, he's just trying to best me or something.
So
like
you're
I
mad
hit it
right
and
now.
Hoffman, like He has 50 gifted subs. That's amazing, by the way. So thank you very much, Hoffman. That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's always good when people get into like giveaway PvP.
Like pay it.
Yeah.
Hoffman is very
forward.
competitive with his generosity. I will say that.
Yeah.
Donation PvP is really cool.
We should be happy that Midnight Space Monkey isn't here, because then it would go bananas.
Or Apollo 428, he goes nuts too. He's.
I see what you did there, bananas.
Okay, so here's a thing that I find interesting, and this goes back to a conversation I had with CCP Rise 3 years ago or so. But we're talking about old players and were there enough players and all this other stuff. These kinds of conversations at eVegas. And I got the impression, and this was a while ago, 3 or 4 years ago, that they're like, well, this probably had to do with jump changes at the time. We often have an outsized, we hear an outsized, point of view from old players, and we're trying to get these new players, and maybe we should start listening to some of the newer players. And I feel like that was a long time ago, but it kind of put the thought into my head that the kind of players that were attracted to Asakai going forward were great for the game. They kept it going, but it really shifted the whole large-scale PvP is the only thing that matters dogma. And I think CCP is really trying to grapple with trying to get more interest in PvE. I think you even saw Hilmar say that recently. He said, yeah, PvE is terrible, needs to be fixed. It has been in a bad place for a long time. And in doing so, I think I'm not sure that they think in one term or another. I think they're doing multiple things at the same time. But it seems like a lot of their attention for good gameplay is going into PvE right now. And the artificial intelligence is helping that. And it's just becoming more, more of, it's not just about nullsec. It's not just about PvP. Like I honestly feel that shift happening. And now that they're making nullsec scarier, I think it's becoming even more interesting.
I think that the big thing about this is that CCP, I've been going over this with a lot of people recently. CCP fundamentally is incapable of creating a PvP content, right? Because that's players that create that. They can try to put down tools, they can try to disrupt things, they can try to coerce or finagle or whatever people to doing what they want to do. But ultimately, that is influencing the sandbox. That is what they're not supposed to be doing. The thing that CCP can do is change the environment, right? Like that they run the universe. And this goes back to Hilmar saying that they're taking responsibility for the first 7 days, and they're taking responsibility for the early player experience. So far in the history of EVE, we've relied on this pivotal moment in which like a player ganks another player and then like combos them and convinces them not to quit, and then they get all mad or whatever it is, and then they're now a firm player. And while that moment is important, it is difficult to control and difficult to ensure works out when it happens. But if you create PvE experiences that kind of recreate a verisimilitude or whatever of that situation, you may get a similar effect. Additionally, I'm reminded of why games like Mortal Kombat have a robust single-player story mode as time goes on. And the reason why is because fighting games take a lot to learn. You have to learn before you can even begin to quote-unquote play the game. You have to memorize all the different moves, all the different counters, how the frame locking of all that. I don't even know all the stuff it takes to do a fighting game. I just know that what looks like chaos on the surface, once you learn it, is like a chess game. And that reminds me a lot about EVE, right? Like there's a lot of things that you got to learn in EVE before you can even really be making the decisions that it takes to be quote unquote playing the game, right? If you don't know how your modules work, if you don't know how to fly, if everything's still confusing you, you're not playing the chess game yet. You're just barely hammering at keys. So giving people a regulated, fairly standard, although randomized challenges for them to test themselves on not only allows players to get better at the game, but prove to themselves that they're getting better to the game, which is going to hopefully assist in retention because players feel empowered. They know that they don't know anything. They know that they're weak, but at least now they have the tools to fix that. Whereas before, it's like, well, now what do I do? And the answer is, well, anything you want. And that response is so daunting that people end up having decision paralysis and just don't do anything. Or mine.
Yeah. Well, here's something that came thanks to a friend, dropped this off. Let's look at it. It's a quote came 3 days ago. It was somebody asking Hilmar if they were building the next, is it a 10-year plan that's going to be what Star Citizen wants to be? And here you can see the answer to that by Hilmar. Hilmar says, we're making a universe of our own, or we're making our own universe. We'll be in collaboration with millions of people. We will disclose more details when we're ready. The time is not now. Millions
posting
of people. Yeah, is he baiting or is he talking about something that's to come?
From my understanding, that comment in particular was in response to a question about Nova, though, wasn't it?
It was to Nova, yeah. Talking about integration between Nova and...
right.
Yeah, but it also hints at the other new thing that they're working on, right?
It hints at a lot of things. I find it particularly noteworthy that it came up in a conversation about Nova.
Well, I think the idea is if you put Nova together with EVE Online, are you creating something that is supposed to be what Star Citizen is supposed to be, which is spaceship flying, animated avatars, and undocking and walking on asteroids, whatever they were thinking of doing. And Hilmar is saying like, well, we're doing our own thing, and we're going to do it with millions of people. So not sure what he's talking about, but millions is a lot more than we're playing right now. So who knows?
Well, there's just a lot of potential stuff going on under the hood these days, right? CCP is getting really good at keeping their cards close and not really revealing anything to the player base. But what we can see from some of the hirings and shiftings and the whole Pearl Abyss thing, there's something going on under the hood, and it might actually be what he's hinting at right here, right? We were speculating like crazy last night in voice comms about whether or not this might hint at something resembling a reboot of the original Walking Station Carbon engine, because there might be some motivation for BDO to have something like that, right? Pearl Abyss.
Yeah.
Because then you don't have to pay licensing and stuff. So if they're basically taking that thing from the shelf and saying we can polish this and actually make it work, and then we might even be able to potentially license it in the future and get like 1 or 2% of that market. There's just a lot of potential in doing that and using it to create a totally new brand. So the EVE players don't actually explode would mean that you can then cross-pollinate from all of that, right? There's just huge potential in there, and we know that those assets have been on the shelves for years now.
All right, I'm unmuting Saren and Seraph Patakane. Seraph is a test FC, and Saren, I believe, is a newer player, if I'm not mistaken.
May I ask a question, though?
Yeah.
So, and you guys may or may not know this, but I know that like when Valkyrie was a big thing and when Nova was being worked on, there's this bit, and actually, well, all the VR stuff, there's this big push towards Unreal Engine because Valkyrie was in Unreal, and they had started developing Unreal stuff, and they were hiring Unreal engineers, and they were working alongside other Unreal engineers, and that's where a lot of their cross-pollination came from those years. Do you know if they're still like doing a big effort into Unreal? Do the Nova engineers Unreal engineers, or are they working on something totally new? Does anybody know?
Well, that's kind of the question, right? Because you could view this whole thing as selling off all the Unreal-centric topics, right? All the IPs that were Unreal-focused seems to have been now shut down or sold off, right? So you could argue that maybe that's because they are actually working on their own in-house thing, so they don't have to focus on Unreal, especially now that they have a big partner.
I mean, that's a big deal. Obviously, the creation of Carbon was supposed to be a monumental task that got basically aborted by Walking in Stations. But it was it was a very ambitious goal, and the idea is that once you can create an engine, then you can license it out. But the other problem is that the game industry is very different than it was back then. Unreal Engine 3, which is what they were trying to create Carbon to be a competitor against, was still a licensed program. Unreal Engine 4, thanks to Unity, is open source and therefore is free to make things up until a certain point. Then you have to get a license once you get like money. So it'll be interesting to see. I would almost rather see CCP specialize in getting people who can work on things like Unreal rather than try to reinvent the wheel.
All right, let me bring in Seraph Patakane. Are you there?
I am, yes.
How you doing? How's
Not doing too bad.
What are you up to right now? Or lately?
Lately, just looking over the drifters and that sort of stuff. So, as you know, with the drifters going into absolute overdrive the last few days, it's been pretty hectic for Test to sort of secure all the structures without having to call for fleets left, right, and centre. Luckily, we've been able to sort of wrangle around a few new Citadel gunners to sort of clear it out. So it's been pressure, but manageable pressure.
Yeah, I've heard they ramped up today, just a few hours ago.
We've just noticed a smaller drifter fleet. So yesterday it was like 1 battleship and 2 cruisers. Ron just noticed a 4 battleship, 5 cruiser gang roaming around and actually going into ANOMS again. So we had a tackled Rourke. That was put under a little bit of pressure.
Yeah, let's take a picture of that. That was a fool.
Now, one of the tendencies of the drifters is that they reinforce each other. So as you kill some, more come in. That's actually where the Cassandras and the Orions usually come into play, is that, like, for instance, as you attack a Seeker, Circadian Seeker, then the drifters show up to defend. And then they can escalate further and further. Do we see any of that? I've seen it with the Triglavians.
No.
Like, if you're fighting the Triglavians, as you're killing the first pack, another pack will warp in very frequently as if being called. So no, there's none of that?
Not that we've seen. Well, at least that I've seen when going around killing these drifter fleets. It's the fleets that I've seen. I didn't see many yesterday personally, but the drifter fleets I was seeing was like 4 or 5 battleships up to 8 cruisers, sort of in a gang,
Right.
and that would be it. But it did seem like, looking around the intel that I was seeing from like fraternity space, especially, was these groups were spawning in the system at random and then joining up with each other and then forming one big sort of fleet. So there was one screenshot I saw of about 30 odd drift battleships with about another 40 cruisers flying around.
Interesting. My other question at that point would be, will a single pack target multiple targets? Will multiple packs that have banded together target multiple targets? Because another thing that I've seen is, like, if 2 Triglavian waves warp on top of me while I'm fighting a 3rd Triglavian wave, then the chances of them splitting DPS is much higher, almost as if they're still working together. They have the same basic objectives, but each pack is able to select targets on their own.
Can't confirm or deny. I haven't seen, say, 2 or 3 separate groups form together and I fought them. The groups that I have fought have been the single groups and they've always gone after a single target.
Okay. And then finally, I heard mention that the targets today have been mostly associated with Jovian Observatories. Is that correct?
Give me 2 seconds and I'll check what was our system.
Well, somebody earlier while we were talking mentioned that today it seems more associated with Jovian towers than before.
I'm just checking because we just had a ping about it, so I'm just trying to see exactly what system it was in.
The reason why this is important to me is that Jovian towers are usually associated with the drifter wormholes. And if the drifter wormholes ever become something to do with these drifters, you can go in the drifter wormholes and see where they're connecting to, just like a wormholer would be able to look at the statics, right? So
this was a system with a drifter hole, with a Jovian observatory in, yes.
So there you go. It may be worth seeing whether or not we can put somebody in these 5 drifter wormholes to keep an eye on where the wormholes are opening and see whether or not they're connected to locations of attacks.
All right, let's send our troops.
Well, I mean, I've been talking about this for last week, so it's one of those things that, like, maybe even if they didn't have that idea in the first place, CCP was like, "Shit, that's a great idea. Let's do it."
Yeah.
So who knows?
Give me 2 seconds. I'll send my dude to that system now.
Oh, good.
Cool.
Ash, keep it going. I have to step away for a second, which I've never done, but I'm going to do it. Keep it going, Ash. I'll be back in a second.
All right. So there was somebody else that was in here besides that, right? So the person that was doing the report?
There's a group. Well, there's a whole group that's unmuted can talk there.
Okay.
I'll be back.
Right, but yeah, okay. So, does anybody else have any stories about encountering the drifters over the last 24 to 48 hours? Oh, good. The conversation dies as soon as it's handed over to me.
Complete silence.
Well, I'll put it from the test perspective. The notification channels that we have for citadels that are being attacked went absolutely haywire. Like, we were getting 10, 20, 30, 40 plus citadels reports across all regions every 10, 20 minutes or so. It was insane.
So the scope article, the scope video today mentions in the ticker that drifters are not targeting structures as much as before. Would you say that that is true?
Looking at our notifications, yes.
Okay. Because one of the things I'm starting to suspect is that, like, for instance, last week we got all obsessed with the statement attacking low power and vulnerable structures. They also said that these are unconfirmed reports coming from Nullsec. So I strongly recommend people be cautious, because if we start reporting something, scope might echo what we're saying, regardless of whether or not it's true, right? So the very first thing that got destroyed last week was a low-powered jump gate. And so it could very well be that the scope was merely reporting what has been reported to them, and then we took that as like CCP gospel and got mad at CCP for not following that. So
yeah, it definitely felt like we said certain things about the certain first iteration of it, and CCP went, right, we're going to take that sort of criticism to heart, and turned everything up to 11.
It is really interesting because it felt like Nullsec complained about it. It felt for a minute that CCP had caved on Nullsec. And then on Wednesday, it almost felt like a message where it was like, no. You're right. It was bugged, but it just wasn't doing enough damage yet. Now it's back. You know what I mean? Like, I feel for Nullsec, man. This is too much. This is incredible.
It is quite overwhelming. But I'm wondering, like, maybe I missed it because I was off grabbing a drink. But so it seems like the drifters are attacking less structures now. Do we see any other changes to their behavior apart from the fleets themselves being slightly bigger? Like, are they still doing anomalies, or are they doing something different?
They're going into anomalies.
They're going into anomalies, and the report about them attacking less structures was the report from today. So that would have referred to the activities of since Wednesday, not necessarily a change. There hasn't been, as far as I know, there hasn't been a secondary change today outside of the fact that now there's bigger fleets. Additionally, another thing I want you guys to keep an eye on, I know fighting the is kind of intense as it is, but if you could keep track on whether or not they have overshields, which is the blue shield, and whether or not they look visibly damaged before you actually start hitting them. In the first week, they looked visibly damaged. In the second week, they didn't. Also, look to see if you can see the visual effect on the ship itself. You'll see these like ripples, and that's their overshield itself. So see if you can visibly see the overshield, see if you can visibly see hull damage, and then compare that to whether or not they have an overshield and whether or not they doomsday. From my understanding, the rats in Nullsec have no overshield and have no doomsday. So
they have no doomsday. I can confirm that so far. They did have overshields from my experiences.
So that's fascinating. So far, every drifter that I know of that has had an overshield has also had a doomsday. Their doomsday seems to be connected to the overshield. So
yeah, which is what we feared, because I was the first one to engage the drifters in test space when we had the the spam of alerts. It was like, okay, we've got drifters attacking this. What do we do? And I was like, well, we could send carriers in, but if they have got doomsdays and there is this amount of them, they could probably alpha the carrier off the field. So we went in with supers initially.
Well, the thing is that the drifters, generally speaking, cannot just doomsday at will. The only times that they've ever doomsdayed at will was against Jamil Sorum. So there is this suggestion.
A player
there's this
event.
rumor. Well, yeah, Jamil was a NPC actor. Well, she was the Empress of the Amar, who was in a Titan, and so a bunch of drifters warped in, and they all simultaneously doomsdayed, and then they warped off. So and they even said that they had to make a special exception to the drifter priorities in order to make that allowed to happen. That being said, there is a hint or a suggestion that there might be something in the drifter AI where if the value of the target is high enough, that could trigger them to preemptively doomsday. Now that may not be for these rats that may not have the doomsday, but for more the normal rats. I don't know. Like there's so much in the air right now.
Is it just me, or is this drifter lady kind of sexy?
I knew you were about to say that.
Well, they're just drawn that way, I guess.
Is that like the furry thing, but for drifters, kind of?
Which is really sad if you think about it, because that comes out of the imagination of some guy in Iceland humped over a desk, and it's like, oh, okay.
Well, anyway, drifters.
Drifters
male
are hot,
drifters,
says Drake. Drifter. Yeah, she's kind of a dominatrix looking lady. Maybe not. All right.
Oh, okay. Well, that's fine.
Anyway, I just thought I'd throw a joke in there. Well, I think we're almost at a point of wrapping up. Again, the conversation goes on at TIS the rest of the day inside of public chat. People will be here all day long talking about this stuff. Huge blockbuster news coming out today about Blackout in Nullsec. You won't be able to see anybody if they don't want you to. And possible asset safety removal, which would make things very, very interesting.
I just think it's awesome that now we've gone from like maybe every week we have something exciting to discuss about Eve, maybe during the busy times, to literally like daily. It's like, oh my God, what's happening now?
What happened today?
Yeah.
We have a question. Has Triglav ships proven specifically effective against drifters? And are they arch enemies lore-wise?
I don't believe so. Actually, that does remind me. Arataka has put a lot of effort into fighting these drifters. And so I strongly recommend, once again, that the Null Blocks reach out to Arataka and see about them helping you. They're interested in helping you. I watched Arataka undock rattlesnakes and take a drifter doomsday to the face. They know what they're doing.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that I've seen a lot of more YouTube videos on the Fermi paradox recently, and due to this happening in the Eve, how it's going to be portrayed in real life, or people are going to be talking about it, like there's always that entity that people are scared of, that hey, if we go exploring into space, what happens if someone else?
Did you cut out on the last part?
No, I mean, it was just that currently the drifter situation and that's happening in Eve is closely related to that, and other people have been linking it to, of course, like the Mass Effect, where they had the Reapers, and equating it to Firefly as well. But like,
I've been saying it has all of the hallmarks of the alien invasion plotline, right? The aliens show up, they have too much power, they're undefeatable, they're undetectable, there's no way to stop them, and they're just crushing everything. And then eventually you gain a foothold and then an edge, and then you start like reverse engineering their technology, and by the end of it you're like on level with them. It's XCOM, it's ID4, it's Descent Free Space. Like, this is a plot that is pretty classic.
By the way, Matterall, we didn't touch on the media coverage. Maybe that's for another stream.
No,
but we are getting some
longer.
attention from it.
I have a nice block of time today. It's holiday, so what do you want to say about the media?
No, it was something you mentioned. that if you haven't noticed, maybe someone can find these links as well. PC Gamer made an article when the drifters first came out, basically saying that Eve is in chaos mode. No one really knows what's going on. We have these drifters showing up and they are wrecking stuff. There's been some other articles as well. There is one that I love the headline because it basically says that CCP introduces NPCs that just annoys people. So I think that's quite funny. But that one article, from what I understand, Matterall, that one was very well read, or a lot of clicks at least.
Yes. This is by Stephen Messner. Is the article on EVE Online's and Alien Invasion. It just did gangbusters for them. Besides being a Messner article, it was also something that people are interested in. Let's see if we can see comments. Whoops. Gosh, look at this. 171 comments. That's big. Even for them, I think that's a lot of people talking. So you can see.
But my question is, how many of those people are saying either Eve's a horrible game or Eve's an amazing game, but I could never play it?
Well, we'd have to read through the comments, but you always hear the same thing. It's this game's great to hear about. I don't want to play it, but I like hearing about it. And other people saying like, oh, that sounds like a job. I want to play a game, not a job. Stuff like that. But you definitely hear like, good idea, CCP, very unpredictable right here, this Russian guy. The aliens look like Borgs. I think these are a lot of non-EVE players, but there's a lot of interest in this. So that's why I was asking Carneros at the beginning if this was an interesting thing for players, for people who don't yet play EVE Online but might be interested. And this might be the thing that draws them in. Like, oh, I want to see what that's all about. I don't know if that's true, but it just seems like, oh, it's not untrue either.
If I may for a second, by the way, this idea that EVE is a job and that is somehow a problem is kind of frustrating, actually. Because if you think about it, WoW is literally just a set of jobs.
Yep.
That's all that quests are, is like, hey, do this for me, I'll pay you for it. Like, that's what a job is. And so, like, one of the things that game design has kind of learned is that we would like to be satisfied and feel that we are doing productive work. And to be doing productive work, we have to be voluntarily doing it, and we have to be able to see the impact of what we're doing. We need to feel that what we're doing is meaningful, right? And we live in this world where that doesn't happen as much anymore. We live in jobs and work in jobs that divorce us from seeing and feeling the good work that our efforts produce. We've been disassociated with these things. And so people are intensely unsatisfied. And so more and more people are moving on to video games and seeking a satisfying solution that the world is not providing for them. That's that autonomy, mastery, and purpose that both me and the Matani referred to that other day, right? And so these video games where there are these organizations with 20,000 people, 30,000 people, yeah, it's work, but it's the kind of work that people actually seek in order to gain satisfaction with their lives. You know what I mean? This is why the truckers do what they do. This is why the logisticians do what they do. It's because they want to feel and know and experience the positive effect of their work. You know, the guy who spends hours defending citadels, right, can at least take satisfaction that he can go to Dotland and see how much success his organization has because of what he has done. And that's where a lot of the idea of these rewards and this is just dumb, or I'm just wasting my time, or I'm just bored comes from. They need to have that connection that feels like what is happening is meaningful and they're actually succeeding at defending something. And I think that that's the reason why they tend to not want it to be an AI and they want it to be a player, because they don't see an AI as a real existent threat, but they do see a player as a real existent threat.
So this comment here, I left EVE after 10 years because basically the egos and it got stale. And he goes on to say, this makes me want to reinstall. Interesting.
We've had some people saying that they will resub.
yeah, this is one of the interesting things, because a lot of people that burn out from Eve because they have a bad perception of Eve, right? Like they get into some aspect of Eve, whether it's mining or nullsec or whatever it is that they get dragged into, and they think that this is what Eve is all about. And so when that becomes dumb and boring and stupid to them, they don't think, oh, I should be doing something else in Eve. They think, this is dumb, I should go play a different game, right? So, but this kind of news is so outside of the box and jarring that it invokes the imagination. And that's what's causing these people who were at one point interested in checking out Eve, but then were disappointed in what was presented to them. They see this as like hope and potential for this thing that they at one point wanted to be good.
It's interesting. I'm looking through these comments, and I'll look through all of them. It's like 170 of them. People seem to be really for this sort of thing. Like I haven't seen, like here we've seen nothing.
And that's amazing.
Yeah, we've seen
That's
nothing
great.
but complaints about it. Well, not nothing. There's a few people who are anti-complaining or anti-nullsec or whatever. But most of it has been like, this is terrible. This is no fun. It's not really good gameplay. And you're looking at these comments from people who don't play the game or basically just writing on PC Gamer, and they're like, this sounds great. Burn it all down.
Well, look, I think you've got two things like out there on those kinds of things, right? You probably do have players who are either former players or people who didn't play, and it's like they may be sitting there going, "Oh yeah, play it great," right? They don't have any skin in the friggin' game or whatever. It's similar to when you have people from other parts of space here as well going, "Oh yeah, this is great," because it doesn't affect them, but they think it's bad for somebody else or whatever, right? It's like if you don't have skin in the game in some way, you kind of got to discount the comments to some degree.
Well, I don't know. This guy says something here. This is the third comment I've seen like this. Says it's about time. I quit the game years ago because Big Alliance is making life miserable to anybody who is not part of big alliances. That seems like what the backlash is, right?
That seems like this. Nothing that you have seen here today, folks, is going to change that.
And 18 upvotes.
No, on the contrary.
And 18 upvotes. No, but the perception is that nullsec's getting the kick in the rear that they deserve for making everybody else's life miserable. That seems to be what the anger is. And he's got
but it's just
upvotes.
tragic that you get that response, right? Because that's so wrong. The effect of something like this will be anyone that is not playing empire building the same way as goons will have no chance at all, because all these changes will introduce things that need all that logistics and all that intel stuff, right? So it's just a huge strain on those people.
I think you're going to get a lot more hunters. Go ahead.
No, what I'll say is about that is you're saying that you can't be you can be something other than an empire build and succeed in Eve. At the moment, with the current meta, that's very hard and I think near impossible to do. Because with the advent of the N+1 meta that everything in Eve is balanced towards effectively, you're telling me that you're going to be able to come in with something smaller, less people, less firepower, and my empire cannot counter it in any which way.
Well, they can counter, just it's going to have limited success. Maybe.
See, I have a theory that perhaps this is the bubble. Like this argument that we're having is the bubble, because when I go and I mean, everybody seems to be focusing on how much Reddit was hating on nullsec. Most of Reddit was focusing on how amazing just the concept of what was happening was, and they didn't turn on nullsec until nullsec had such a violent reaction to what was happening. So
do you think it was a counter reaction?
Right. Well, so it goes back to what they were just saying, right? So when nullsec made that reaction, what everyone else heard was the same arguments that they had tried to make at various points in their time and been told to harden the fuck up, right? Like, so while nullsecers see it as a difference, which I agree, it is easy for people who have been robbed, been war decked to death, been suicide ganked, been scammed. It's easy for them to see this and be like, well, I thought you said this game was a cutthroat game. Sometimes shit happens. You know what I mean? And so there's a certain amount of schadenfreude from that, from those people.
One thing. Sorry, Sarah. Go ahead.
No, go on.
Okay, really quickly. One thing I just want to. I might take some heat from this, but there's been mentionings of the thing that attracts people to EVE is the news and the media covering all the big fights, the fighting in large scale warfare and all that stuff, which is partly true, I believe. But it's interesting to see that we are getting some quite interesting media attention from this stuff as well, potentially attracting new players. So throwing that one out there.
That's something that I really was thinking about yesterday, which is that this is one of the very first times that EVE has been in the big news media multiple times in a single week, and it isn't about players being shitty to one another.
Yeah.
See, and that's the dynamic I was going about it, is that it's getting out in the media, people are more engaged into it, and it's connected to the Fermi paradox, where if that is a possibility in real life, it's already been planned out in a video game. And the more immersive that we make a world, the more people want to play and jump in and try it out. On that note, Nullsec has been an entity without being attacked for such a long years since this game was created. I think 16 or 20 years since we've been playing EVE. Finally, there's an enemy that's on the grid and on the board that's pushing people to negotiate with other entities or nullsec powers. And yeah, sometimes you're going to have to cede more territory and constrict yourself to a smaller area, which that's what a few people had mentioned here. I think we were talking to Matterall on that it might give a smaller alliance of maybe 100 to 500 people to hold one system for themselves and live on the borders or the regions of a larger entity, whether it be PanFam, Goonswarm Federation, or any location in Tino and Vino right now that's open. If they can defend it and they have gunners that are manually people that check on and see the drifter invasion is coming or the drifters are attacking their stations and they can respond quickly, then the more efficient you are at controlling territory, the larger you can expand. Though, like you guys said, you don't want to make this into a job. To what?
This is the problem with EVE in this aspect about people saying it's a second job is most other MMOs now, especially new ones, are rewarding in very short periods of time. So you play an MMO like Guild Wars or World of Warcraft nowadays, you spend 2 or 3 hours on there and you've basically done everything for the day. EVE isn't like that. EVE, you can spend 6, 8, 10, 12 hours on it and you'll still get the still in the first hour. Something bizarre in terms of, I can't do more after hour 6.
Drifter attack.
Yeah, is that me or is that that's everybody?
That's everybody.
It should.
But yeah, to his point, that's the difference between doing somebody else's content and making your own content, right? Doing somebody else's content takes only as long as it takes to run the content. Making your own content basically takes as long as you want to work on it.
Yeah. Yeah, here's something interesting. It says, like, why does this article quote the whiners? Oops, I didn't want to say that, but why doesn't it quote? Yeah, whatever. It's a quote. So the whiners and make it sound like a problem. Seriously, why couldn't the article quote any of the vast majority of players who applaud this instead of only paragraphs from a few players who are crying about Sandcastle? What's up? And he got 22 upvotes for that comment. I think that's pretty interesting. In contrast, somebody saying...
mention.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to mention that if these nullsec entities don't want to live in nullsec anymore, they could restrict themselves or move back into highsec or lowsec, whatever region they want to. But to take it out on other people, on like, oh, if we're going to get a shitstorm, you're going to get it too. It's kind of like I don't know. It's a different type of psychological factor game style that you want to play, and it might go good for you in the beginning, but down the road, other people will remember what. We'll keep that on record, I guess. Go ahead and continue with Matt.
What are you saying? Highsec will remember.
There's a first order for
another comment. 20 votes up. Hilarious. This game is this is a real game. Another guy's like, that is awesome.
I'm not going to lie. I don't necessarily agree with the attack high sec or whatever as your form of protest or whatever, unless basically what you're doing is you're using kind of this thing for a second purpose that comes afterwards, which is to then more methodically lay out the grievances, right? Once you've gotten the attention from something, then lay out a list of reasonable grievances with this and try and change things, right? Don't just go hurt other people for the sake of, lashing out. So I'm mixed about it. I hope that there's a second wave kind of element, that comes of it if it's just a protest.
Again, some more stuff. What is it? I love it. Congratulations for CCP for daring to shake things up. Another person says, this is the most badass thing I've heard in an online game. These guys are getting like 20, 30 upvotes each. And the guys that kind of talk it down, they get like 5. So at least on PC Gamer, the crowd seems to be like, this is good stuff. I like seeing that.
And this goes back to the point of what's been made over and over again. People that are impacted by this negatively is actually a really small group, which leaves the group of people that aren't impacted by it very large. And so the group think will tend more towards a outsider's perspective, which means you're not having to do the work. But on the other hand, this is the same as it has always been, right? Like reading about BTAC-R has always been better than being in BTAC-R, right? Like it always sucks to be the guy who the news is being written about. Nobody wants to be the person that got robbed enough that it made PC Gamer.
Yeah. Well, I think that's something to remember in context when a lot of people you feel are on one side of an issue or another is like, what population are you hearing about? And like I said, Reddit seems to have, maybe because it's a different medium, we're a real-time river of people posting. And what have we had in the last 3-4 days is just a deluge of one post after another, one post after another. A lot of them have been people saying this is bad. What's CCP doing? How can they be messing up so badly, etc. But there is clearly an undercurrent, and outside of our community here, a lot of people are saying like, this is great, shake it up. And now it's getting more intense. So 2 weeks ago, they were saying, yeah, CCP has made a mistake, with these drifters. I hope they're temporary. And some of my friends were saying, oh no, this isn't temporary, and it's going to intensify. It's going to get worse in the next weeks. I think, Ashtrotha, you were one of the people saying that. It's probably going to get...
I kept saying that just wait until Wednesday, and then everybody interpreted that as it'll get better, and I kept stressing, no, I just mean it's going to change. So far, better hasn't been one of the options.
But here comes CCP and they blow the whole cap off the thing. Now it's not just an issue of drifters, whether there's a bunch of them or they're all over the place or whatever. Now we're turning off your lights. That's a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that whole dynamic of Concord not being able to protect the outer regions and then having to cede some of the safety assets and communications is pretty interesting. And overall, like, it's another dynamic that's going to have to be included when you're dealing with alliances or smaller alliances that you want to try to move into a region, because it's more like you guys said, wormhole space. So some people were pushing for it, other people weren't. So I don't know what you guys' thought process.
So my question is this: is who does this? Like, if you turn the lights off, as you say, who does this hurt more?
Oh, it doesn't matter. It's just I'm talking about the ratcheting up of change of.
It's definitely a good thing. It's definitely going to be, everyone was saying, oh, the drifters are going to be, a big game changer to the nullsec meta, da 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 da. And it's like, well, actually, this turning off of local is going to be a bigger change, because it's not just going to impact the small gangs going around trying to, kill ratters and that. When you go out on big fleets now, you can't just send eyes to a system and instantly get oh, there's 300 in the system and that's their staging, we sort of roughly know what's going to be. Now you have to go to Keep Stars, click on them, see who's docked. Are they at another Citadel? Are they at a safe point? Are they here? Are they there? So that amount of intel that we used to get in big fleets is going to be removed. So when you see the enemy ping and it's like, if you don't have eyes in that system, have they already left before you get there? Is there a surprise dread bomb that you don't know about?
As a scout, can I just say how excited that has me? Like, that is literally the first thing that has made me want to go back to Nullsec in 7 years. Like, the fact that intel would matter, and then it's not just an FC that has an alt, but it's a full-time job that requires expertise and knowledge. Fucking sign me up, man. That is awesome.
Yeah, if you don't have roots in Null already, right? Effective roots, you're pretty much just going to be a loot pinata if there's no asset safety once you try to get in there. You're just going to put yourself out there and say, kick me because I'm trying to live in Null. You can't live in Null now with these features if you are not extremely rooted and integrated.
I don't know about that. It has to do with how much skin you need in the game, right? Because if you're just taking a system, what does it take? It takes like an Asterhus and a couple other things. So maybe 3 billion ISK, you can set up a nullsec system, and with everybody a little bit more insular, maybe there's going to be room to be able to find a system that you can just hole up in and have taking you out be more annoying than not. So
yeah, you can roam, but you can't get a foothold. The barrier of entry has just been increased like tenfold.
No, that's what I'm saying. If you have no desire to, or if you're just trying to make yourself, right? You can get in there and you can hole up in one system, and you can have your Asterhus and whatever it takes to control the system, the thing that makes it for free, and now it's yours. And you can just fortify it and see what you can do with your, dudes. And the problem is, the thing is that with people in nullsec being less expansive and being less ambitious, there's going to be more little opportunities for groups like this to be able to take a foothold without being stomped on by the other alliances, because those alliances now feel that going after anybody, even if it's a little dude, is risky, and therefore you're only going to go after people if it matters. So now people like that can get a foothold and secure their own little area and build up the infrastructure that they need. And now you have a nullsec group, right? Like, I know it's idealistic, obviously, to see it that way, but if your infrastructure is only in one system, like, what all do you need? You would just need an Asterhus, the territorial claim unit, and whatever this listening post is if you need it, and then you're done. And if it gets knocked out, it's 3 billion ISK or 4 billion ISK or something like that. It's no more risky than a wormhole effort.
Okay. No, you're right. It's no more risky than a wormhole effort. You are correct in that. I think it is a little idealistic to believe, because again, a lot of these changes that they've tried to put in place over the years to supposedly allow smaller groups to get it, to get out there and whatnot. I don't know that that's necessarily paid off. I think that you continue to see the expansion of the big boys rather than more of the so-called small groups. But
so
that's okay.
So the hard reality of it is that human nature will lead towards banding together, if for no other reason than working together has a strategical advantage over not working together, and therefore those who work together will eventually triumph over those who do not, and therefore the system will always tend towards universal security. The only pressure that exists against that in Eve is the desire to fight, because it's a game and that's what they're there for. So that's the tension. But it still will tend towards security, because that is a desired thing, and often more desired. And it goes back to what I was saying, what I said the other time, which is that, given the opportunity, players will engineer themselves out of their fun, or optimize themselves out of their fun. Sorry. So the point is that while it is true that if it is true that we don't want this universal blueness, then there needs to be additional things continuously put in to set it back. So Phoebe jump changes made everybody pull in, and we did see all kinds of little groups pop up, including, what was it? There was one named after Phoebe that lasted for like 2 years. But the problem is that the march towards Empire will be continuous because players want to be victorious more than they want to simply fight. So, I mean,
I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that these are the kinds of things that are necessary. They're painful, but if you really want those challenges, that you need to keep doing things that help tamp down the flames.
I think it's a little bit of poetic justice. I'm just looking at this from a perspective from out here, not on any team. But if you look at it, Nullsec gets attacked by drifters, and Matani gathers Nullsec powers, and Nullsec says, "We're gonna mess with HiSec. Part of it's to get rich, part of it's to send a signal to CCP that these drifters will not be tolerated. So we're gonna take HiSec hostage." And what does CCP do? They ramp it up and turn out the lights. And now we'll confiscate your stuff once it gets exploded, at least half of it. And it's just like, oh yeah, we can send a signal too. Now, I'm sure that didn't happen. CCP is not reacting, and but it's a funny narrative if you look at just the storytelling aspect of it.
I do like this idea.
Can I just ask a question regarding
CCP
that
strikes back?
Regarding the asset safety thing, was there any indication in whatever statement there was there that was a null only thing?
Yes.
Yeah.
They say border regions.
Okay.
They specify border regions. Yeah.
Gotcha.
By the way, did we just almost drift into talking about the HiSec invasion? did you see what I did there? Oh, that's so bad. I'm sorry.
I guess I'm a little quiet. Sorry, I'll try to speak up. Proximity there, and the mic needs to get closer.
Could we actually talk about the HiSec invasion? Because I hate it.
Yeah, let's talk about it. Why not? I am not a Dirk.
You're
self-hating nullsecker. I am not.
You live in nullsec, but you have a self-hate for what it is we are.
No, he just has a sense of self-awareness.
I have a sense of thank you, self-awareness, but also I think I try to treat the entire game fairly. And one thing that bothers me is bullying and underdogs and that kind of stuff. So this does play into my emotions, I'll admit. But
let's do that then. So here's the thing. Like, we had the drifters coming in, and one of the hot takes immediately was from the Meta show, because we had them introduced, what is it now, 1.5 weeks ago on Wednesday. The Matani was very outspoken when it came to the drifters and how he thought that it was a bad implementation, CCP screwed up, all of that kind of stuff. And he's going to be mad if I misquote him, but on that show they basically said that we will get attention from CCP by invading HiSec to make a point. So we will burn down HiSec in order to get CCP to listen to us, because once you get HiSec people to start whining and bitching, that's when CCP actually pays attention. That was the narrative put forward. So it was directly tied to the drifter invasion. At this point, we've come to a narrative where it basically says that regardless of how the drifters, this is taken from the TIS Discord and when we had the Mitani on voice, etc. Regardless of how the drifters develop, HiSec will be burned regardless. So that's been kind of cemented. Doesn't matter if they change the drifters, doesn't matter if they fix them or change the iteration into something that could be a more reasonable gameplay element into the game. So basically, we're facing HiSec burning apparently, and that's where we're at, I think. But what that is, who knows?
I'm really excited.
Me too.
Yeah, but why? Why are you guys excited?
Because for years, well, actually, really, this last week has punctuated what has been as long as what? Hello?
Yeah, and can I order a pizza while we're at it?
Matterall?
Mute yourself, Matty.
Where was I?
That didn't go out over air. That didn't go out over air. Sorry. Yeah, I was about to put in my lunch order.
So for weeks, or for the last couple of weeks, we've seen a punctuation of what has been basically since the history of Eve argument, which is what is really more powerful, what is really more important, nullsec or highsec, and people can just can cite whatever statistics that they want, and both sides are totally convinced that they're right. And the only way to finally settle it is to just let it happen. And so I don't know what's going to happen, man. I don't know if they're going to successfully crush the market, but I know that if they stop sending things to highsec, then guess what? That's just going to make all of the mining that's done in highsec more valuable. That's actually going to be helpful to a lot of different players that are in highsec. So
that's true. Yeah.
The thing is that however you look at it, how this plays out is going to be fascinating. That's what's exciting to me.
But the thing is, it's way more complex than that. I should add as well, it's not just about sending a point to CCP. Mittens did say that the immediate reaction that was seen on Reddit, for example, even though I'm not sure if that's a good source to base things on, but he perceived it as there was a lot of non-nullsecers, people outside of nullsec, having such a good time and basically going, you guys deserve this, finally getting to you. They were having a laugh and memes and all that stuff. So that was part of the reason as well to burn highsec. But burning highsec is actually quite difficult. So there's a few misconceptions in my opinion. Bill is joining now as well.
Right at the end, we got to go, but all right.
Right at the end.
Right at the end again.
Let me keep this very short then. There's a few misconceptions. Like the first one is that nullsec players are the majority of the player base. That's untrue. Most of the players are in highsec to start with. The second misconception is that highsec trading, highsec industry, all of that stuff is completely dependent on nullsec. That is untrue as well. Although there's a lot of stuff coming into highsec trade markets and industry from nullsec. And thirdly, I think it's completely overestimated in terms of like how highsec players play the game. Like it's a completely different culture in highsec as opposed to nullsec. Highsec players, to be very frank, they don't give a shit. Like most of the highsec players, they do their own thing. They tend to it takes a while for them to realize what's actually going on. And once they do, they will be like, oh shit, I don't like this. So either I'm going to just log off for 2 weeks or I'm going to do something else. And then I'm going to go back to what I'm doing. So I think I seriously doubt there's going to be huge waves coming from this highsec embargo or the sanctions or whatever. I don't think it's going to have that much of an impact.
I'm not sure if nullsec has really been paying attention to what's been happening in the other sections of space. I've been talking to Liz Lizardbreath a lot about this, and she is astonished that nullsec was so unprepared for the drifters. She's like, have they not ever tried a fob or any of these other, like the diamond rats, or dealing with any of these things that we've been having to deal with in highsec and other places that is basically ramped up to this?
The thing is that nullsec deals with those things in far different ways than others. You talk about fobs and satios, we say 5 titans. You talk about these diamond rats, we say super carrier. So when people are saying like we aren't prepared, it's a case of we're prepared for the stuff that we deal with in our certain way. When you ramp them up into a situation that is beyond human efforts, like 7 regions, 400 attacks across 16 hours, like no human entity is even capable of that, let alone even physically able to do it. Like I can't even see goons being able to do that. 7 regions, 400 attacks across a 16-hour period. They wouldn't have the FC depth. They wouldn't have the line member dedication to do that amount of grind. Yeah, Drifters can do it across the whole of New Eden. That's where a lot of the nullsec salt was. Is like, this is not realistic. No entity in the game is capable of this.
Well, you're fighting a machine.
You keep going back to that. It cracks me up.
Like I don't know. Like I don't know why you compare it to a human as if that's like the reason why it's not fair. Like I can say that statement and have it be meaningful in every single way.
The whole point and the whole selling point of Eve for the past 16 years was the players make the storylines, the players make the events, and then suddenly we get this arbitrary. It's a machine. It's going to attack all of your shit all of the time at all hours of the day. No,
you are making the story though. You are right now making the story. You don't make the catalyst all the time. Sometimes you do, but this is your story. Players didn't make Caroline Star, but players figuring out Caroline Star was the story.
It's an
players didn't make the drifters
of making a story.
What? I mean, okay.
So what?
It's artificially contrived, like massively, into how they want to spin this story.
Have you ever read sci-fi? Like the robots attack is not it's not even like the first time it's happened in Eve. Like I don't know why it's rejected on those grounds. Like
the thing is that Saref is correct in that one of the key selling points of Eve has been that it's a player-made universe and it's a player-driven universe, and the players create the content, and that's what differentiates Eve from so many other games. Having said that, though, that doesn't exclude the fact that you can have other things impacting the game or being added to the game as well. It's not black and white. You can have both things.
I don't disagree with that at all.
The problem with the iteration of the drifters is, to be fair, even though I'm not in Nullsec, I understand that it's a broken mechanic. It's a broken gameplay element, even though I think the concept is sound. It's good. It's something new. It's something refreshing. And if it boils down to having maybe no local and all that stuff, even better. But it's not like, I think we are being way too, I don't know the word for this immediately, but we focus on Eve being this one thing, and that's not true. Eve is a sandbox, but Eve is a sandbox accommodating so many different ways of approaching the game, so many different game styles, so many different mindsets. There's no one true way of playing the game, and I think we should remember that.
But it's very different when you're used to a game where every time you get ganked or camped, it's always players. That was the unique thing about Eve. Now you can suddenly get ganked and blapped by fucking NPCs. What's that about?
Well, it's happened before.
But that's my point. Yeah, it's been that way in a lot of other places in Eve, and it's supposed to be that way in Null for a long time.
Here's the thing. There's nothing wrong, okay, with CCP changing up the environment, right? I think there would be some question, within kind of how they do that. Is it somehow, even if it is incredibly difficult, can it be, and can it be some sort of enjoyable gameplay experience? Right? Like I think there's a whole bunch of that involved. I get the people that are out there going, wait a second, this is just player-controlled space, and it's player versus player. And guess what? Shit changes.
I got to highlight Stalker Monkey, who says, learn to PvE, bro.
Okay.
Non-consensual PvE, man.
Okay, let me put this back then. So with the reason why there was so much salt from Nullsec in the second iteration, when they started going after anomalies, was there was no counterplay to these drifters at all. Because if you're in a VNI, these guys warp in like frigates, instantly break the warp immunity, insta point you, and then insta kill you because they do 3000 DPS. You're in a rattlesnake, okay, so you've got a micro jump drive. You micro jump drive away, they can still point you at 150 kilometers because I saw them pointing at 500. So again, no counterplay. So when people are saying it's non-consensual PvE, okay, give me a counterplay that doesn't involve a capital against these three, and I'm talking 3 subcaps.
Yeah, but that really does boil down to the drifters being a bad implementation, doesn't it? Like a broken mechanic
And
added into the game.
CCP has a known history of releasing a mechanic and then just sitting back and leaving it alone.
Okay, I'm going to
for
speak to that.
years.
I'm going to speak to that because
Okay.
that has not been true for any of the stuff involving the Triglavians. So for the last 2 years, with the Abyss and with the invasions, we have seen nothing but rapid responses, iterations, and balances in order to try to fix problems. The only
Flex
place that you could
structures.
possibly argue that, I'm not saying, I didn't say that. That has nothing to do with Triglavians and Drifters. I'm just saying they are intensely interested in getting this right. And they have put a lot of effort into it. So when it comes to these things, I can specifically say that they actually have a track record of doing well.
Yeah, the flex structures which could have and do stifle a lot of PvP opportunities haven't been iterated on since the first iteration.
So here's the problem, okay? It is easy to balance something that's a PvE encounter, right? Because you know what you want the result to be, and then you watch to see what the players do. And if the players' activities and responses is not the results that you wanted to see, you tweak it until you get the results that you want to see, right? Or you abandon it.
Let me
Hold
let
on,
me
hold
let me
on.
go.
Let me get to
You
the
just said
actual
it's really
point.
easy. So no, you've just said it's really easy to balance. So I'll go back to the Sino Jammers. Put them straight back to the post Sino Jammer mechanics.
Let me get back to my
fix.
Okay, let me get to the point then. PvE is really easy to balance for that reason. PvP is extraordinarily difficult to balance. And the reason why is because players are super creative. And if a player gets super creative and somehow beats a robot, your PvE, nobody's angry. But if one player's side manages to find some sort of way of being crazy about the system to the other side, that becomes a serious deal. Now, the problem is that it doesn't happen right away. Metas shift over time. And so when it comes to doing things that specifically involving PvP, you often need to wait a little while for the complaints to sink in and then players to attempt to figure out a counterplay. Because often if you try to rebalance things before that manages to be worked out, then when something new does get worked out, everything is totally screwed.
Wait,
because
counterpoint.
you balanced it wrong.
And then we have to go. At least Randolph disagrees with you on one thing. They haven't balanced the Triglavian proving grounds very well.
And that goes back. That's why I said that the one exception is the proving grounds, and that goes back to the fact that that's trying to balance PvP, goes back to the point.
I'm sorry, guys. I'm out of time, but this is the kind of stuff that we talk about all day long in public voice. So jump in there, hang out with us. That's TIS Discord. You can get to it by going to talkinginstations.com, and you will see a link to our Discord. Have fun in there and be nice. This is not the last of it. We'll be back maybe tomorrow morning, and definitely we will start broadcasting this Sunday. And it looks like we'll have Suetonia, among other guests, on Sunday. So hang out. It was great having you guys on, watching. Thank you, Hoffman. Thank you, Amar, and everybody who did subscriptions today. I missed the other person, the third one. And thank you guys, Ashtarothi, Caleb, Dirk, and Amar, and everybody else that was in here. Thank you guys for showing up. Wow. I'm ending just in time. My voice is gone. See you later.
Thank you.